and recipient of the Atlantic Council's highest honor, our Global Citizen Award, and also to see the Special Presidential Coordinator, who's been a partner and a friend of this forum for a long time, and also a former board member of the Atlantic Council. I also want to welcome and salute our new Senior Director of the Global Energy Center, Landon Durrance. I want to thank Reed Blakemore, who's been his acting and still his deputy, and their remarkable team. You're going to see them all over in the next couple of days, and please thank them for their work. Much has changed since we last gathered here at the St. Regis in Abu Dhabi in January of 2020, just weeks before the global shutdowns due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And much has changed since we convened the 2022 Global Energy Forum in March, alongside the World Government Summit in Dubai, just weeks after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And even now, on the cusp of the UAE's hosting of a COP28 next December, I expect that this year will be yet another one of transformative change. Our shared values and commitment to energy security and global decarbonization remains steadfast. And this gathering of leaders from across energy, economics, and politics is here to set the energy and climate agenda for this coming year, and it's probably never been more critical to do that. So I'm just going to say a few words about the themes of this year's forum and what we hope to accomplish over the next 2 days. As I think back to the year that just ended, the most significant inflection point, of course, was Putin's invasion of Ukraine last February. A geopolitical crisis in Europe quickly became a global energy crisis, and it threw energy security into sharp relief, while countries still worked to maintain a sustainable energy transition. Though there are geopolitical lessons to be drawn from the past year, we also saw the energy trilemma emerge clearly as decision makers and stakeholders tried to balance sustainable, affordable, and secure energy. Our call to action is that even amid geopolitical tension, even amid economic stress, we must take care to avoid the false choice between secure and affordable energy and a sustainable transition. So how do we get from where we are now to net zero by 2050? And what are the technologies that will enable a secure and equitable energy transition? That's going to be the heart of what we're talking about in the next 2 days. I'm not here to pick and choose my favorite clean energy technologies, though I have them. But I will say this: true net zero enablers require reliable supply chains, and they address the power sector and hard-to-abate sectors like heavy industry manufacturing, desalinization, hydrogen production, and more. So I look forward to hearing from energy and climate experts and leaders and learning much more over the next 2 days. As the current geopolitical and energy crisis forces us to think seriously about the energy trilemma and the pathways to net zero, we are fortunate to be here in Abu Dhabi, where COP28, hosted in the UAE later this year, November 30th, December 12th, shines bright on the horizon. The Global Energy Forum follows on the heels of COP27, hosted by Egypt as the first African COP since the Paris Agreement. Sharm el-Sheikh emphasized the importance of implementation by all communities to empower an inclusive energy transition. We all look forward to the UAE's opportunity to advance these ideas around an inclusive and reliable energy transition, which will be at the center of the global community's endeavors to meet the challenge of climate change. In light of the UAE's tremendous successes, especially in building nuclear reactors, advancing solar power and other renewables, decarbonizing aluminum, there is no better place to bring the climate and energy communities together to convene these conversations of paramount importance. The announcement late last year of the U.S.-UAE Partnership for Accelerating Clean Energy, or PACE, which will, according to the White House, catalyze $100 billion in financing, investment, and other support, and deploy 100 gigawatts of clean energy by 2035 to advance the energy transition and maximize climate benefits, offers clear evidence of the serious and sophisticated commitment to net zero. In this era, we need true leadership more than ever, and we're fortunate to welcome top energy and climate policy leaders. We have 10 ministers joining us, 16 members of the Atlantic Council's Board of Directors, 3 members of our International Advisory Board, more than 3 dozen CEOs, a large number of civil society experts, media, officials of various governments. You're all welcome here. It's a very exciting group for this period of time. And with leadership in mind, I want to recognize and congratulate Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber, who just this week was named Presidential Designate of COP28. As the reality that we are falling ever behind on meeting the targets for climate action, at the same time that we navigate an energy crisis, the optimism of renewed ambitions alone are no longer enough. As I said to CNBC under the hot questioning of Hadley Gamble yesterday, there is no individual I know that is better prepared and equipped to take on this task than Dr. Sultan. It requires the breaking of silos, it requires transformative thinking and action, and that's something he's done throughout his entire career. We need transformative action and transformative actors who understand the energy system of the present, but have the vision, ambition, and skill to build the net zero energy system of the future, which is necessary to save the planet. I'm confident that Dr. Sultan is more than capable of rising to the opportunity of a new energy pragmatism, which brings the climate and energy communities together in the name of shared action. And with that, I'm delighted to turn the floor over to our longtime partner and dear friend, Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber, President of COP28.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome COP28 President-Designate, United Arab Emirates Special Envoy for Climate Change and Minister of Industry and Advanced Technology and Abu Dhabi National Oil Company's Managing Director and Group CEO, His Excellency Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber. سيداتي وسادتي، لنرحب بمعالي الدكتور سلطان بن أحمد الجابر المبعوث الخاص لدولة الإمارات للتغير المناخي ورئيسا معينا للدورة 28 من مؤتمر الأطراف في اتفاقية الأمم المتحدة الإطارية بشأن تغير المناخ، وزير الصناعة والتكنولوجيا المتقدمة العضو المنتدب والرئيس التنفيذي لأدنوك ومجموعة شركاتها كوب 28.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Good morning, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Welcome to the United Arab Emirates, to Abu Dhabi, and to the 7th Atlantic Council Global Energy Forum. And thank you, Fred, for your kind introduction. Thank you for your leadership, for your partnership, and for making sure that we always have the right mix of expertise participating in this very important forum. And as the opening event of Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week, this forum helps set the energy agenda for the year ahead. And as the UAE prepares to host COP28, the Emirates Climate Conference, this year carries a very special significance. The UAE approaches this task with humility a clear sense of responsibility and a great sense of urgency. Like all countries around the world, the UAE is exposed to the risks of climate change. We have always considered environmental stewardship as an integral part of our economy and view climate action as central to the successful development of our nation. We are proud to be the host country of the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, the first country in our region to commit to the Paris Agreement, the first in the region to submit a nationally determined contribution, and the first to set out a roadmap to net zero. And we will continue to focus on this very important journey. More than 18 years ago, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the President of the United Arab Emirates, had a long-term vision of the future, and he took a bold step when he decided to establish Masdar. This was our first major, practical, proactive move into the energy transition. Under His Highness's guidance, Masdar has grown to become one of the largest renewable energy investors in the world and is aiming for a 100 gigawatt portfolio by 2030. Over the last 15 years, the UAE has invested a total of 50 billion US dollars in renewable energy and clean tech globally, and plans to invest another 50 billion US dollars in the years ahead. And beyond investing in new energies, it was His Highness who said, "There will be a time when we load the last barrel of oil." And he continued, "If our plans and investments today are right, it will be a moment of celebration." This call to action by His Highness at the World Government Summit in 2015 clearly underscored his vision for sustainable development, delivered by economic diversification and enabled by a rapid transition of our energy systems. And today, over 70% of our economy is generated outside the oil and gas sector. And as the founding CEO and chairman of Masdar and the MD and CEO of ADNOC, I will continue to follow our leadership's vision and guidance in making today's energy cleaner while advancing and continuing to invest in the clean energies of tomorrow. And we will use our experience, our ambition, and deep and rich network of partnerships to inform our approach to COP28. During the course of the year ahead, we will work very closely with COP27 Egyptian presidency, the UN FCCC Secretariat, and of course, all relevant parties to build on and accelerate progress made before us. Yet, we must be honest with ourselves about how much progress we have actually achieved and how much further and faster we truly need to go. Of course, we have collectively achieved major milestones along our journey. In Glasgow, 90% of the world's economy is committed to net zero by 2050. Sharm el-Sheikh elevated the voices of the Global South, put loss and damage firmly on the agenda and started to address reforming the climate finance system. COP28 will have particular significance as it will mark the first global stocktake, a comprehensive assessment of progress against the goals of the Paris Agreement. And we don't need to wait for the stocktake to know what it will actually say. We are way off track. We are way off track. The world is playing catch up when it comes to the key Paris goal of holding global temperatures down to 1.5 degrees. And the hard reality is that in order to achieve this goal, global emissions must fall 43% by 2030. To add to that challenge, we must decrease emissions at a time of continued economic uncertainty, heightened geopolitical tensions, and increasing pressure on energy security. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no other way to really address our climate challenge. We need to make transformational progress. And for that to happen, we must be prepared. We must be prepared to transform the process with the support of all parties and stakeholders. We want COP28 to transform systems and accelerate 2030 trajectories through game-changing partnerships, game-changing solutions, and real, tangible outcomes. We want it to be a COP of solidarity that bridges global north and south and includes public and private sectors, scientists and civil society, women and youth. And we want it to be a practical COP, a COP of action, a COP for all, a COP that raises ambition and moves from goals to actually getting it done across mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, and of course, finance. Allow me to elaborate on those points one by one. On mitigation, we know that many of the solutions do exist. Scaling renewables and nuclear and hydrogen and carbon capture and energy efficiency, and of course, the least carbon intensive oil and gas, as well as new technologies yet to be developed and deployed. Wind and solar added the record growth of 550 gigawatts between 2020 and 2022, and are on course to grow more over the next 5 years than over the last 20 combined. The market is actually telling us something here. The market is telling us something. We are at a turning point in history. Low carbon growth is the future, but we must get there much faster. We must triple renewable energy generation from 8 to 23 terawatt hours by 2030. We must more than double low-carbon hydrogen production to at least 180 million tons for hard-to-abate sectors. We also need to transform our food and our agriculture systems because we know that agriculture accounts for 1/3 of global emissions. Much greater investment in agri-tech, smarter water use, and food production is needed to transform this critical sector alongside many other sectors. And we need to do all this in an accelerated time frame against a fast approaching deadline. And let me just add this. Our world is on its way to being home to 9.7 billion people by 2050. And will have to produce 30% more energy than what is available today. And as long as the world still uses hydrocarbons, we must ensure they are the least carbon intensive possible. We'll work with the energy industry on accelerating the decarbonization, reducing methane, and expanding hydrogen. Let's keep our focus on holding back emissions, not progress. On adaptation, the number one priority is very clear. We must do more to protect our most vulnerable communities and our most critical systems from extreme weather and biodiversity loss. We must protect our rainforests and invest in nature-based solutions like mangroves that act as powerful carbon sinks while protecting coastlines and preserving natural ecosystems. We must ensure that our global food system is resilient to the changing weather patterns that threaten farmers around the world. And to enable this progress, we must double adaptation finance for the Global South to $40 billion annually by 2025. On climate finance, we simply need more. And we need it to be more affordable. And we need it to be much more accessible. We need to ensure that every concessional dollar is matched by $2 or $3 of private capital. To make this happen, we need to answer the call from the international community for inclusive reform of the multilateral development banks and international financial institutions. In fact, that is a critical success factor. And to encourage this process, the UAE, as chair of the World Bank IMF Development Committee, intends to play a proactive, supportive, and facilitating role. And on loss and damage, we need to help the most vulnerable to rebuild after climate-related disasters. Together with the international community, we must build on the progress made in Sharm el-Sheikh and fully operationalize the Loss and Damage Fund. Distinguished delegates, dear friends, as an ambitious young nation that continues to evolve, the UAE has grown through partnerships, opened up to new ideas, and learned many, many lessons along the way. We don't claim to have all the answers, but we believe we have something valuable that we can contribute. At the crossroads of North and South, East and West, we will listen. We will engage with all those who wants to engage. We will listen. And we will engage with those who want to engage. We will build bridges, and we will pursue global consensus in this very important collective effort. Together with the high-level champion, Her Excellency Razan al-Mubarak, and the youth champion, Her Excellency Sham al-Mazrou'i, we will work very closely with the UNFCCC to move from ambition to real action. And we will mobilize the private sector and all other sectors to deliver greater, more meaningful impact. So let me extend an open invitation to all parties across government, private sector, and civil society. Cooperate, collaborate, share your ideas, and talk to us. I am here to listen, and I am here to engage. We can only succeed if we have an open and constructive dialogue. Let us together create a paradigm shift for tangible progress. And let us remember that reaching net zero emissions will deliver the biggest market transformation with the greatest economic and human promise since the first industrial revolution. I urge all parties to help make COP28 a COP of concrete outcomes and practical solutions. We are united by our common goal. We are united by our common humanity. And we look forward to hosting you all in the United Arab Emirates, where together we can ensure sustainable development for this generation and all generations to come. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage Mr. Frederick Camp. سيداتي وسادتي، لنرحب مرة أخرى بفريدريك كامب الرئيس والمدير التنفيذي للمجلس الأطلسي.
Dr. Sultan, wow, that was a call to action if ever I've heard one. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for kicking off the 2023 Global Energy Forum in such fine style. In just a few minutes, we're going to have a very special event to follow. Another distinguished guest and friend, His Excellency Suhail Al-Mazroui, the Minister of Energy and Infrastructure of the United Arab Emirates, will be joined by His Excellency Saad Sharida Al-Kabi, the Minister of Energy of the State of Qatar, as well as the President and CEO of Qatar Energy. Of all the things we've done over the last 7 years at the Atlantic Council, we haven't had a conversation with the two of these gentlemen on the same stage at the same time, so we're really looking forward to that. And the other thing I'm really proud of is how quickly the team can actually set things up. So, ministers, please come join us. I'm not sure.
You want to sit in the middle?
I think it's better you sit in the middle, and I'll sit here. It's an honor to be with the two of you today, and thank you for helping us kick this off. Concerns around energy security and improving energy access in the developing world have been at the top of the agenda this year, with natural gas being a major area of attention given Europe's efforts to rapidly diversify its natural gas imports. So I actually have two questions. One of them is, we had quite an extraordinary, for the two of you to kick us off. One of them is that we had a quite extraordinary 2022 in the energy world, and a little bit of reflection on that, but what you expect for 2023. But then on world natural gas questions, prices spiked this year, but seem to be returning back to earth. And then within 2023, in your eyes, does it reflect an equilibrium of supply and demand balance for gas? Or do you foresee in 2023 further imbalances on the horizon in the short term, but through this year? So a look at the year ahead, a reflection on the year past with a specific look at what you expect for natural gas. Mr.
Well,
Minister.
first I'd like to thank you for hosting me and thank my very good friend, His Excellency Suhail, for inviting me to this event. It's a pleasure to be back in the UAE with such a distinguished audience. I think if you look at the gas supply demand and what happened last year, it started actually before the Ukraine, where the lack of investment in the oil and gas sector caused really a shortage in gas. And ahead of the Ukraine, the oil and gas prices obviously were clearly going higher due to lack of supply. And that lack of investment was driven by many factors, including the bigger push for the green without having a real plan for how the transition is going to happen. So there was a scarcity of investment over about 5-6 years. And then when the Ukraine situation happened, a big volume was taken out of the market, and obviously that would take it even further up. I think, 22, the spike is very obvious why, but 23, I think it has come down as everybody has witnessed. But the mild winter, I think, in Europe is the biggest cause. And there is storage, ample storage, but they haven't had, luckily they haven't had a very high demand for gas due to the warmer weather. The issue is what's going to happen when they want to replenish their storages in this coming year and the next year. There isn't much gas coming into the market until 25, 26, 27. So I think it's going to be a volatile situation for some time to come.
And prices will be volatile with it. It'll be going up and down.
Yeah, prices are a factor of supply demand. I think some people think that we are very happy for high oil prices and so on. The biggest worry that we would have, I think, as oil and gas producers is demand destruction. And you can see that there is demand destruction with whether it's gas or oil. And unfortunately, I think the wonderful speech that we heard from His Excellency Sultan, talks about what we're going to do going forward, and we're all for what he mentioned. But you can't have coal at record highs and say that we are going to achieve our targets. 30% of the power in the world uses coal, and all the countries that were calling for coal to be stopped are using it at record levels today. So I think we need to take a very serious action, and I think coal is the biggest emitter by far. And I don't see I see a lot of attack on oil and gas companies and demonizing oil and gas companies. I don't see the same attack on the biggest polluter on the planet.
I'm really looking forward to coming back to you about the demonization question. Mr. Minister, you have lived through so much change and so much history since you took over as the minister. Everything from OPEC Plus to what we experienced last year, rolling off the war in Ukraine. How do you look at 2022, what you expect for 2023, and the same question, particularly with a particular focus on natural gas?
Well, first of all, it's glad to see this crowd. I think probably this is the biggest Atlantic Council energy that we have ever since we started, and I'm grateful for His Excellency and for all of your excellencies for coming. Actually, I would build on what His Excellency Saad mentioned. We've been talking about the lack of investments and the lack of interest from the financial institutions to finance fossil or oil and gas projects. Part of that is also the lack of understanding what is the future for many countries when it comes to energy strategy, what contributions or what percentages they would have of gas, or even the pace of reducing their coal. It's not clear. I mean, there are plans, but those plans are not concrete, and that unclear long-term strategy by many countries put them in a situation where it's very difficult for them to commit for a long-term gas contracts, which is in return made the companies or those who are developing the gas at a very difficult position with their financiers, because they would like to see a long-term contracts, and those long-term contracts are not there. Everyone wants to buy, but they want to buy in a 2 years or 3 years span, and that is not enough for someone to develop gas. Gas is available, and there are huge discoveries in the recent history, but the development pace is not there, and the investment is not there. So that is one of the problems, or one of the issues that causing the problem today. Of course, Russia is a major producer of gas and LNG, and when you shift from one location to another, trying to adjust, that takes time. And that's what happened in 2022, where some of that gas have been relocated to another market, and other gas from other market is homing to Europe, especially from the US. But is that sustainable in the longer run? I think you would need more collaboration between the European nations on agreeing on the optimization of the FSRUs that are also limited, and also agree on some pipelines. I think one of the things that contributes to energy security is pipeline gas. And together with Qatar and with Oman, we have established the first regional Middle East pipeline that secured and made energy security affordable and available for the three countries. And I think in the future, if you ask me about the future, I think we need to do more of these projects. There are countries which requires gas, and we cannot do everything as LNG. I think State of Qatar and His Excellency personally is involved in some of the largest expansions of LNG. Dr. Sultan as well, and ADNOC, they are also increasing their capacity of exporting. But even with that, with those investments, it's not enough. Gas has to be available and has to be affordable to secure and to become a base load that helps the renewable energy and help cleaning up the environment and reaching the COP goals. We are committed. We will do the investments, but I think the whole world need to think about the resources and need to think about how we enable the companies and the IOCs and the NOCs to produce more gas to make it available and affordable.
Thank you for that answer. Minister Al-Kabi, I want to come back to your comment about demonization. This is a country that's one of the, I guess, OPEC's third largest producer of energy. It's also a country that's been a pioneer. Dr. Sultan talked about Masdar in the renewable space at the same time. In the COP process in the past, the climate community and the fossil fuel providers were rarely in the same room. Are you seeing a change? Climate community seems to be more open now to particularly natural gas as a bridging fuel, more open to nuclear power as well, other solutions in decarbonizing carbon. And the fossil fuel community is investing billions in new technologies, in renewables, et cetera. Dr. Sultan was talking about a paradigm shift. Is that too utopian to think that that's where we're going? Talk a little bit about how you think these two communities can come together and actually accelerate the reduction of emissions, not slow it down.
If I can just be a little bit blunt maybe about this, is the community that was driving the green was living in a dream that they realize they can't achieve. Okay? And basically, if you want to achieve what we all want to achieve, I think we're the hottest place in the world, probably. So climate change affects us more than most. For us, it's very important that we head in that direction. It's very important that we achieve these goals. But we need to be realistic about what we can and cannot achieve. And we can't be driven by just political agendas of people wanting to be elected. Okay? It should be based on reality, based on what can be achieved. I'm an engineer. You tell me I want to achieve an objective, I'll tell you, okay, can I do it? Put the plan, what's the budget, and we achieve it at this timeline. But just to talk about achieving net zero, and the majority of the countries that you talk to, they talk about net zero, and you say, how are you going to achieve it? They say, we achieve 60, 70% of it by 2040 by doing this, this, and that. And the rest is technology improvement. So that, I'm not a native English speaker, but that doesn't mean we will achieve net zero. It means we'll strive to, we'll try, we'll see what we can do to achieve it. Okay? So to me, I think the realization of the need for gas, because wind doesn't blow all the time, solar is not available all day, and technology improvements in storage and so on is going to improve, and there are a lot of things that will improve and hopefully help us in that sphere. But I think there are two sources that will be needed for the very long time for people that don't have hydro and other renewable energies. You need nuclear for those that can afford it and are capable of building it and have the technology. And you need gas. And these two will have to be the base load for countries for a very long time. And I don't agree that gas is a transition fuel. I think it's a destination fuel until we have a realistic solution that can do away with gas. It's a destination fuel that you will need for a very long time. And when we say we need more investments in gas, and as His Excellency mentioned, they're expanding in LNG. We're building 65 million tons. We're producing 77 million tons today. We're building 65 million tons of LNG that has already been FID'd. Okay? Now, so almost double. 48 million tons coming from Qatar, and our investment in the US is another 16 to 18 million tons. So we're bringing really a lot of gas to the market, but it's not enough. And you can't achieve what we need as humanity and the number of people that are going to grow, as His Excellency Dr. Sultan mentioned. We need growth. 1 billion people today are deprived of basic electricity that we all enjoy. So we need to be fair. And I think one point I'd like to just add to that on the investment side. It's very, very, very unfair of some in the West to say that African countries should not invest in oil and gas and they should remain green or whatever you want to call it, while this is a God-given wealth that they can create for their national growth and for their prosperity, and it is oil and gas that is needed for the world. And we should not forget the oil and the petrochemicals and what you need there. People love kayaks. They love the coolers that they take for picnics. There is no renewable that can manufacture that. It's oil-based solutions that get you there. Okay, so it's ethane crackers and plastics and so on that are needed. I know we need to do a lot of work there, but let's not forget the reality of what we need. A lot of stuff that you have around you here, and the decoration and the flooring and all that, is oil and gas. Yeah. What we're wearing. Okay, so let's be realistic while achieving the goals that we want.
Minister Suhail, I'd love you to build upon what you've just heard from your colleague with the question of the climate community perhaps dreamt things, dreams that were inachievable, but also from the fossil fuel provider standpoint, is enough being done?
No, I don't think we're doing enough, but there is a wave of new thinking, and and I'm glad I see it more in the IOCs, in the NOCs. Typically, the technology and all of that comes from you, Discalci, and the others who are here. But I am really glad to see companies now thinking of reducing their carbon intensity, to see state-owned companies seeking the highest technologies to reduce methane emissions. And that is kind of a change in the industry that we haven't seen. We need to remember that the cleanest hydrocarbon is probably produced here in the Gulf. If we compare the carbon intensity of what we produce as a barrel here, and you compare it with barrels elsewhere, probably we have the cleanest barrels or the greenest barrels you can find. And that comes at an investment. It doesn't come free. I mean, us and Qatar and same with gas. You could produce gas, but you could produce gas also with the intention in mind to reduce the carbon intensity. And that's, I'm sure, what QP is doing, and Qatar Gas, and what ADNOC is doing. The fact that we here in the Abu Dhabi walk the talk and say that we will use the only electricity we will use in the field to produce oil is going to come from renewable or clean sources, that's by itself, it's a commitment. It doesn't come free. It comes, I'm sure, at a cost. But that's the cost that we are willing to do our part. And I'm sure we will see more of these actions. So we will do our part. But realistically, you need a base load. Until we reach a price for the base load to complement the 100% renewable energy, whether it's a battery or other technologies, we will need a base load contributor. And I agree with His Excellency Saad, for a very long time, gas will be there. Percentage-wise, it may reduce, and it will reduce. But in absolute numbers, it will increase, and it will increase significantly. What is the worry? The worry, with that increase in demand, we will not have enough supply. And gas and oil are a finite resources. They are not going to stay there forever. We have seen countries going steeply in decline. Only, talking about oil, and gas is like oil. Only within the 23 countries with OPEC Plus, since 2000, the reduction in the ability to produce is more than 3.7 million barrels. What does that tell you? That tells you that we are in a decline. In many countries, they are in the decline mode. Same with gas, I am sure. So not every country have the resources that Qatar has, or UAE has, or Saudi Arabia, or other countries. Many countries have started earlier, and they are in the decline mode. Same with the US. How many years? And are we going to have enough batteries or technologies to assume that we will have it and it's going to be uniform everywhere? I think that's a big assumption. But at the same time, we need to do what Sultan have said, and we are committed to do it as a country. We can afford to do it, and many countries will do. But can we enable and be a platform for inclusiveness, so everyone is enabled to do it? How many companies like Masdar we need, and how many alliances like the one with the US we need with the 100 gigawatt? India will need to install probably 500 gigawatt in the next 20 to 30 years, and more in China and many other countries. That's, I think, where we are. More renewable energies will be installed, but we need a base load. And for a base load, we need more investments in the gas.
Thank you for that, Minister Suhail. So, Minister Al-Kabi, I racked my brain last night about how to think about a question that linked the global energy market to the World Cup, and I couldn't come up with it. Lionel Messi just couldn't get into any of my questions. But congratulations anyway on the World Cup. Give us your view of what you foresee in the global gas market that might be preventing the market from reaching equilibrium. Is it the resources? Is it the investment? So much is being demanded of gas right now. So much is being demanded of LNG. If you had told me, 2 years ago that suddenly Germany would have, within 6 months, 3 new import terminals brought into the market by the Vice Chancellor of Germany, who is the leader of the Green Party, it would have sounded preposterous. So how do you see the future of equilibrium in the market, and what are the problems in getting there?
Yeah, on the German side, we were negotiating with the Germans for about 10 years. And suddenly they came to us and said, we want to build terminals. So, the world changes. I think the equilibrium will be achieved by hopefully some kind of a mediation or truce or some kind of a political solution where Russia and Europe get things, I think, sorted out, if you will, politically, hopefully, and the sooner the better. I don't think that this war and this situation will not last forever. I understand that the Europeans today are saying there's no way we're going back to Russian gas. We're all blessed to have, to be able to forget and to forgive. And I think things get mended with time, and I don't think some of the countries that were depending 100% or a very large percentage on Russia will not go back to 100% or 80% or maybe 50%. They will diversify and they'll learn from that situation and probably have a much bigger diversity. But the Russian gas is going to come back, in my view, to Europe. Is it next year? Is it in 5 years? I don't know. But once the situation is sorted out, and that I think will be a big relief to the whole gas sector and to the whole market in Europe, and will stabilize prices. And again, as are coming on a big scale, as our project from the US is going to bring about 80 million tons starting in end of 24 and then really peaking at 25. And then Qatar Energy's investments in our expansions in Qatar, 48 million tons are going to come. The rest are smaller projects that will come a little bit later. But other than that, that's the volume that's coming. And if governments and legislators do not promote additional gas investments, as His Excellency Sahel said, if I'm being very selfish, that's good for us. Mm-hmm. But that's not good for the development.
So the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory announced one of the most significant energy breakthroughs in living memory. Aiming 192 high-powered lasers at a tiny spherical capsule, just 2 millimeters wide, they're able to harness the same reactions of the power of the sun and stars to demonstrate fusion ignition, proving what until now has only existed in theory and paving the way towards what could be, one day, near limitless sources of energy for the future. And back in the UK, we're taking leaps of our own, because we're not just developing our very own fusion power plant, a spherical Toloman, on the site of an old coal power station in the Midlands. We're also operating the Joint Energy Torus, the most powerful fusion facility in the world, and taking the lead in regulating and commercializing fusion technology, working out the best way to get it out of the labs and into the real marketplace. There are stories of entrepreneurs and innovators working together to deliver clean, secure energy for millions of jobs, thousands more, and stories that tell us the fates of energy security, net zero, the economic growth are inseparably intertwined. Dependable supplies of fossil fuels, particularly natural gas, have a crucial role to play in easing the energy transition. We just heard about it in the discussion on the stage. But it's only by harnessing the power of transformative green technologies that we can also build a global energy system that's fit for the future. And whether that's in the UK, where we're developing small modular reactors, which promise to make nuclear easier, faster, and cheaper, and we've been running them in the sea for the last 6 decades, the Rolls-Royce-powered Trident submarines, or here in Abu Dhabi, where operations have begun at the Baraka nuclear power plant, the first nuclear power plant not just in the UAE, but in the whole of the Arab world, expected to deliver up to a quarter of the nation's electricity when fully up and running. And where last week ADNOC announced $15 billion to accelerate its decarbonization strategy, investing in everything from energy efficiency and electrification to carbon capture. Now, yesterday, I signed a clean energy memorandum between the UAE and the UK to promote energy security and investment between our two nations. Agreements like this really matter because when it comes to climate change, the whole world has a stake in it. And none of us should have to settle for less. So working together really matters to deliver a low-carbon future that isn't just more secure, but also makes us all more prosperous. But a future that's fairer is, I think, a future that is worth fighting for. Our international climate finance has already provided an astonishing 58 million people with improved access to clean energy since 2011. But we're delivering on our pledge to double up to at least £11.6 billion in that fund from 2021, reaching tens of millions more. Because the green industrial revolution mustn't leave anyone behind. After all, you can't just shut down your power stations and be done with it, leaving millions without energy or employment. That's where Just Energy Transition Partnerships come in, and they're mobilizing billions to support the transition from coal power to clean growth in key economies like South Africa and in Indonesia. And by investing in new green energy supplies, electric vehicles and hydrogen, they're providing security and opportunity for communities across these countries. Ladies and gentlemen, I have to say it's fitting that we're here in the UAE, 2023's COP28. President-elect Sultan Al Jaber and his great leadership and speech this morning, because it's here that we're seeing building on the extraordinary progress that's been made since Glasgow, built on in Egypt, that this year we will have to see those real developments in this stocktake COP taking place in November and December. We face challenges the likes of which no generation has ever faced before. So let me just take you briefly back to that solar sea in the desert that I talked about visiting last year. Today, they're building the tallest solar tower in the entire world, concentrating the heat reflected by tens of thousands of moving mirrors onto a single point.
Mahmoud, can you speak to that?
If I can build on that, there are two things. One, at the global level, if we're not going to be dealing with a problem that is very much upon us, it's going to derail all efforts related to finance and investment, because what we see on the recession, fears of stagflation, low growth in developing economies and advanced economies, investments prospects in 23 and 24 are on average less than where they were in 2020 by 5% to 8%. So here we need really to see what kind of investment effort that we need to push in order to deal with the problems related to climate action, as it is part of sustainable development, not an isolated one. The second thing, that we have more than 60% of developing economies and emerging markets are in some form of debt distress. If you are a developing economy, you are either at a debt challenge or a debt crisis or a debt catastrophe. And that cannot really be left for time to be solved. And there could be some relaxed folks around there because they say, well, advanced economies and their financial systems are protected. It's not the global financial crisis. No, but that may have triggering effect as part of the supply chain. And if we are going to be seeing these scattered fires, that will catch the rest of the economy. So we need really to have, through G7, G20, it's good that both Egypt and India, Egypt and the United Arab Emirates are invited as guests for the G20. So hopefully the issues related to priorities for climate action are going to be reflected in the discussion in India. And then at the project level, what made the news in Glasgow, what made the news when it comes to projects in Sharm el-Sheikh, are the projects related to what's so-called JETP projects, the Just Energy Transition initiatives. And South Africa was first, then we heard about Indonesia, then another project in Vietnam. And all of these projects are ranging between $8 billion to more than $15 billion. What we need to see is some serious actions in these country platforms, because they are going to be transformational. The way that they are designed are fantastic, phasing out from fossil, investing in renewables, dealing with the impact on community. This is really nice when it comes to design. What is missing so far is basically the kind of action that we need to see, not just in these three countries, but in the rest of the countries, including in Africa, Latin America, and Asia.
Minister, would you like to add to that as well, and perhaps offer a view on what you see as the biggest transition risk from here?
Thank you. I think the transition risk is that not only, as Dr. Mahmoud has mentioned, on the part related to the finance or the projects, but also one important part on the transition risk is very much related to the culture and the mindset. Even when you started earlier discussing the public perception, the just transition, as we need to invest in technology, we need to invest in finance, and we need to invest on plans and time and give countries that part, we need to invest in changing the mindset of the public of how can that be done. For example, Egypt as a country has been facing for quite a long time the waste, the municipal solid waste. And every time we started engaging in that discussion, we fail on that part on different fronts, on tackling the informal sector, on putting the laws in place, in including the private sector, in even collecting and doing more infrastructure work. Part of the change that we have been trying to do is investing in the way people looking at the garbage and how that can be dealt with. The first part that we have done beside the law is the way we have been addressing the young people and school children in order to change the mindset, and how can that be done. Two things that we have been trying to do. First, working on what kind of green jobs could be done within the waste sector, what are they offering, and how can that be included. Secondly, working with the youth and the young children. Even we have in Egypt a very famous group of young people who clean up the Nile, and they are called the Very Nile. And the moment we went down with them, everyone, by the way, and that's part of the public perception, was getting ironic and sarcastic, saying, why are you cleaning the Nile when your streets are still full of garbage? But that is taking a lot of courage and being bold to do that kind of work. So one thing that I would recommend for a just transition is to invest in the human resources, changing the mindset and the culture, and doing that kind of an alternative jobs that could be provided, and how can those jobs come at the very local level. And here I talk about the rural areas. For an example, part of what we've been facing is the burning of the rice straw that comes up with the methane and with the increase in the greenhouse gases and air pollution, and all Cairo would be a black cloud over 2.5 months. Part of what we've been providing is a job opportunity of the recycle of the rice straw, getting compost, getting fertilizer, but including also the women in the rural area for providing clean energy. So that's, I think, is very important and key, because finance and technology will not solve if we keep the same mindset within the same reach.
It's a very good point and very important to add. Thank you, Minister. And we have a few minutes left. Does anyone in the room have a question for the Minister or any of our other panelists? Thought I'd open the floor, give you the opportunity to have your say.
Okay.
No, I think we're okay. Oh, in the front, sir. We'll try and get a microphone over to you if we can. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to ask Dr. Mahmoud, how does he see the energy transition contributing to economic diversification in the MENA region?
Well, this is a very good question that had been raised before the time of COVID and before the war in the Ukraine. And there was a very important piece that came out from the IMF about where the demand for fossil fuel in the GCC will be reaching its peak. There was some similar work as well that was conducted for Norway. And here the discussions were basically about the peak will be some year like 2027 or 2029 based on different models. And then we got this piece by Daniel Yergin on the new map. And then, of course, the idea there is not a factor of time, it's a factor of technology. We are where we are today in energy and diversification of the sources of energy because the huge investments in invention in countries like the US and Europe and development, research and development at scale in China. That's why you see some projects, including here in Masdar, in Egypt, in Binban, in Ouarzazate, in Morocco, with a fraction of their cost only 9 or 10 years ago. But diversification here is not just about diversifying the sources of energy. But being in Abu Dhabi, I just like to emphasize this point, that this country had been prepared for that. When Masdar was established in 2006, I listened carefully to His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, when he said that the day that the UAE will be exporting, the last barrel of oil will be a day of celebration because we are going to be prepared for it. We are going to be with a diversified sources of energy and diversified economy that's not going to be mourning the day that we lost this source of energy. So it's good to have this kind of midterm, long-term planning. The first part of the investment that are required for the GCC countries have been always the investments in skills. When the discussions, especially with the WEF talks about the fourth industrial revolution, about the investments in the fourth industrial revolution related kind of investments, scaling up the population and how to do the digitalization better, this was a source of interest here. And then investments in areas related to the services sector and manufacturing that could be with high value-added component. And there are many good examples that we can really get from countries, especially from Latin America, that were very much dependent on commodities and they were hit by the ups and downs of the cycles. So it's all, I think, there is a great deal of learning by doing in this region. And we have seen the prices of oil and in their 100s plus, and we saw them in the negatives during in the futures market and COVID. So I think it's basically about how to diversify better. I'm not worried about the areas related to investments in fiscal and on the finance, but more needed definitely on matters related to the skills and the human capital. That I would borrow from my good friend Damilula here, is basically when you talk about the region at large, there could be these kind of generic kind of suggestions. But what could be good for Bahrain may not be necessarily good for the UAE or Qatar or Saudi Arabia. So some sort of granularity on the design as we see it in the vision for 2030, for instance, in the UAE and Saudi Arabia. The first and last line in those reports were basically starting with diversification, and the last point was basically gaining the momentum from the diversification investment. So it's on the mind of the policymakers, and we see some sort of a good pace in that direction, but that needs to be done in a faster pace and not to be misled by sudden prices in fossil fuel, because we know that they don't last forever.
Excellent question. Does anyone else in the room? Over here, sir. We'll try and get a microphone to you. There it is, over there.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much. I'd like to ask a question to Damilola with reference to the point you astutely made, that it's very easy to talk about the urgency of things like the refugee crisis, but there is an urgency, obviously, that's pre-existing and is, as indicated by you, to do with how many people are living currently, whether or not they're moving across into different countries. What would you like to see? What would you think would be an impactful way to approach this year's COP in order to land that understanding so that action could be more effective?
Thank you. I think I've mentioned it a few times. It's all about money right now. You know, there has to be a concerted effort on funding the transition in developing countries, knowing that energy access is at the heart of that transition, and, you know, developing industry and jobs. People don't like to live where they are, leave where they are because they just want to. They leave because they don't feel that they can get, you know, what they need from their locality. And we see that, you know, the climate issue has caused lots of conflicts, of course, lakes drying up. There's a lot of things happening, you know, on continent and developing countries that can be avoided if there was just this effort. And this effort isn't just going to come from the private sector. It's hard for the private sector sometimes to even fund emerging economies, not to talk about developing countries. So sometimes the public-private partnerships and understanding that you do have to fund government, and developed countries that have caused a lot of these problems do have to put money on the table, because there is a social return on investment which will keep people hopefully in their localities and bring the economic growth that we want for everybody.
Fantastic. Is there perhaps time for one more question? Yes, sir, in the front here.
Just in relation to finance, should we not be talking about the value created? So, you know, that's a huge opportunity rather than how much it's going to cost. The other aspect is to put to the panel, you know, we also might need to make the link between energy and healthcare, because from air pollution, that's a huge cost. And also our health system, you know, we've seen from COVID, huge pressures. So there's a huge opportunity to make a link between global energy and healthcare. So I'd put that to the panel. How do we do that?
Thank you. Let me touch base on that, because one part that we have been doing in COP27, two parallel global initiatives, one that was talking about the nutrition and what kind of food that you need to change in the practices of the sustainable food and what kind of emissions that are related to that. And another part on the gender, as we are very much not only interested but believing also on the part related to the woman, is the energy, water, and food nexus. One part related to that is the more you're using your energy and making that just transition, even at the local level and at the level of the small and medium household, and using that renewable energy for irrigation and for food systems, that would make a very good package. It's a package that will be at the heart of the human development process, but it's a package that would strengthen the resilience of the woman provide the food, you're using the renewable energy, you're making access to water, you're working on the nutrition, the food practices. The whole package that I'm talking about is making us more resilient to the diseases. We're making us more strength and more power, and we are making that kind of a shift and the energy transition and using it properly in a circular way.
If I can add just a couple of seconds. The issues related to health, the impact on nature, are not adequately factored in the decision making. So we realize the cost, but when we do the accounting for the returns, we do only the accounting for the financial returns of the projects. If we are putting into consideration the cost to the health system, as you mentioned, to the nature at large, and very few even OECD countries are doing that in the national accounting. That needs to change. The regulatory structure and the incentives need to be changed. And that could be the way in order to provide the proper incentives, in addition to the nexus approach the minister mentioned, but there is an issue related to regulations. And one very final thing, the issues about, I don't like to leave it in a worrying part, but the issues related to forced migrants because of climate, the issues related to refugees are not an issue of far distant kind of a problem. These are imminent problems. If we check what happened in this region, in Yemen and Syria, before the developments that we all know in 2011, it had something to do with the climate, and I refer you to the Ian Bremmer book on the crises. And while I wouldn't go to the estimates of 1.2 billion refugees in 2050 by Zurich and others, but basically look now on how many millions in Pakistan, for instance, are displaced within their country, and how many of them are looking for opportunities outside Pakistan because of what they are in today. So it's basically, we have the solutions, finance, technology, what is missing, leadership, and basically, hopefully, through COP28, we can get some better solutions into that direction.
So just very quickly, totally agree on healthcare. We actually launched a Powering Healthcare Guide yesterday with Irina, which is looking at how to provide power to 10,000 health facilities across the African and parts of Asia as well. These are easy, deployable, renewable solutions that can be used to actually treat people, because it's estimated about 1.2 billion people, I believe, go to healthcare centers and have no access to electricity, so they have no access to healthcare. Thanks.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. I want you to thank my panelists.
No, thank you.
Minister Mahmoud and Demilola, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening in. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and thanks again to the Atlantic Council. Joining us up on stage next is going to be the Atlantic Council CEO, Fred Kep, alongside John Kerry, Elizabeth Yee, and Andrew Steer. Please make them feel welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again, and good morning.
Please. So the panelists, just an incredible panel, is going to join me in just a couple of minutes on the stage. We're just going to reset the seats here just a little bit for our group. And I just want to greet all of you. It's wonderful to see you here again today. It was a wonderful day yesterday. For those of you who don't remember, I'm sure you do, I'm Fred Kemp, President and CEO of the Atlantic Council. And we're privileged today joined by three powerful voices, not only climate and energy, but on world affairs. And I'm wondering, Yvette, am I ready to call them out? Yes, you ready? Okay. So it's my honor and pleasure to be joined today by the U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, former Secretary of State John Kerry. He'll be followed by Andrew Steer.
Oh, where do you want me? Where do you?
Yeah, one of the middle ones. That's good, right here. Andrew Steer, the President CEO of the Bezos Earth Fund. And then Elizabeth Yee, Executive Vice President for Programs at the Rockefeller Foundation.
Thank you, Fred.
And Liz, thanks as well for all the good work we're doing with you at the Arst Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center. If any of you have been seeing more attention to the dangers of heat and rising heat in the last couple of years, if you've been seeing more chief heat officers, if you've been seeing named heat waves, if you've been seeing this not only in the press but also connected with gaming, then it's our senior director, Kathy Buffett-McLeod, who is here, who is Senior Vice President of the Atlantic Council and Senior Director of Arst Rockefeller Foundation Center. So, Mr. Secretary, that's the last commercial moment for the Atlantic Council.
I doubt it, but that's okay.
We've known each other a little too long. During the UN Climate Conference in Egypt this past November, COP27, your three organizations, so the U.S. government, Rockefeller Foundation, Bezos Earth Fund, announced the establishment of a new tool in the global effort to keep 1.5 alive, the Energy Transition Accelerator. Now, there's no doubt about the scale of the challenge to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. There's no doubt that that challenge is immense. And as we witness the effects of climate change permeating a constant drumbeat of other global challenges elbows when world leaders have to give more attention to the coronavirus pandemic, Putin's criminal war in Ukraine, recession, inflation. Inaction, however, is not an option. That's what makes the launch of the Energy Transition Accelerator at COP27 so exciting. That's the reason we wanted to have a panel dedicated to that here at our 7th Atlantic Council Global Energy Forum. This new policy platform, which was announced as a collaboration among the U.S. government, Rockefeller Foundation, and Bezos Earth Fund, aims to overcome one of the largest, if not the largest, inhibitor to meeting global net zero targets, and that's access to finance, and particularly in emerging markets. So at the Atlantic Council, we pride ourselves on having tough but necessary conversations, you heard that yesterday as well, which enable us to resolve the globe's most fundamental challenges. And the question of how to unlock that funding certainly ranks among them. So for that reason, I hope our conversation today with these distinguished individuals will illuminate a path forward and provide us with their vision for removing the barriers. So I've known Secretary Kerry as Senator Kerry, now Special Envoy Kerry, but you'll be Secretary Kerry because this is a title that I like to connect with you most. You've been such a leader in all three of those realms. Everything you touch, you take enormously seriously, and that's the kickoff for this question. When you and your partners introduced the idea of the Energy Transition Accelerator, COP27, and it might even be interesting to know how it came about, you said your aim was to put the carbon market to work to deploy capital to speed the transition from dirty to clean power. So how did this come about? Why did you feel that such an initiative like this one is so vital? And then maybe you can put it a little bit into the context of the COP28 we have coming at us. You heard Dr. Sultan yesterday morning. By the way, thank you for being there, Mr. Secretary. So let me turn to you to kick off this discussion.
Well, Fred, thank you very, very much, and thanks for the Atlantic Council's leadership and your leadership personally for a long period of time. You and I have known each other for many, many years now. And I'm delighted to be here with Elizabeth, with Andrew, and I thank them, both of them, and Raj Shah in absentia, for the Rockefeller Foundation and Bezos Earth Fund daring and willingness to push the curve here, which is what we need to do. You're all leaders of either a business or an NGO or some interest in this issue. And in that capacity, there isn't one of you who doesn't have the skill set of standing back and looking at a problem when you see it and say, okay, how are we going to solve this? we are here because we are problem solvers and people who want to get things done. And I am particularly disposed to avoid situations where you're just spinning wheels and pretending. And there's an awful lot of pretense around this particular issue in many quarters. We have to be more than deadly serious. I think all of you know that. This is life and death. It is existential. We have folks around the world, some of whom think they can be indifferent to it, but we're seeing the consequences of that indifference. And if you're content in your business or otherwise to spend literally billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars to clean up after storms or to build a dike after the flood has come or whatever it is, you're on the wrong side of this issue if that's where you are. We have a lot of challenges around the world right now. The world is surprisingly discordant and at odds with itself in too many places, and that's a tragedy. But it's human-induced and it is human-solvable. And what we need to do is be more focused on the ways in which we're going to address these kinds of issues, and none more so than on the climate crisis. This really came about because of reality. I was traveling last year around the world and having many, many different meetings to try to gin up ambition, which we did, by the way. We succeeded in ginning up ambition significantly in Glasgow, building on what we did in Paris. And we are now, and we have built up some ambition out of Sharm el-Sheikh, and now we need to meet the reality that this is the year of a stock take in which everybody's going to be looked at pretty carefully. And it is the year also during which we have coming at us the question of loss and damage and how do you begin to manage that more effectively. So there's a lot at stake. So what I found in my travels everywhere, universal, around the planet, is not enough money is being put on the table to solve this problem. We're either not trying to do it or we're trying to do it on the cheap. And the result is that we're not doing it. We've never had the full measure of the 100 billion that was promised in Paris. And I, I'm sorry that our political process is such that that hasn't been possible. But we've put a lot of money on the table. We put $94 billion last year out of the Pittsburgh energy meeting, $94 billion mobilized within 3 weeks, put on the table as real money to go to less developed country initiatives, etc. We don't get credit for that. No credit in our system, which says you've got to put 100 billion. So we have 94 billion, but it doesn't count towards 100. So what I'm trying to say is, folks, the system is broken in terms of how we're trying to fix this. And we need to respond more effectively. When I met with Macky Sall, the president of Senegal, or I met with Tshisekedi, the president of DRC, and I met with President Buhari in Nigeria, to a person, they said, we'd love to be able to not have to exploit our gas. We understand the challenge, but I've got people who don't have electricity. I need to be able to grow my economy. I need to be able to have my country share in what the rest of the world has, and to build out community and to build out capacity. And that was to a person, and they would say, can you help us with the build out of our renewable energy structure or new grid or whatever it is? The answer is no, we can't, because we don't have the money. Very few people. No government in the world has enough money to deal with what everybody is telling us we must do in order to deal with this crisis. What is that? Well, the UN finance report, the other individual finance reports all say that to have this transition effected adequately, to meet the challenge of keeping 1.5 degrees as the limit of warming on the planet, we're going to have to invest a minimum of about $4 trillion a year for the next 30 years in order to build out the grids, deploy the renewables, transition from gas turbine, whatever it is, and be virtuous in the way we are providing power to our businesses and homes, in the way that we are propelling our vehicles, etc. Energy is the single, summary of how you cure this problem. Why? What is the problem? The problem is emissions. Methane emissions, CO2 emissions, the other greenhouse gas emissions. Emissions is pollution. And for some reason, we've kind of turned our backs on the responsibility that we fought for in the 1970s and 60s to hold people accountable for pollution. So the science is clear on this. There's no debate. I don't care where you come from in the political spectrum. There is no debate that emissions that come from the way we power our societies and propel our societies, those emissions are damaging. And we do not cure the problem if we do not meet what the scientists have said, which is reduce the emissions at a rate that allows us to minimize the damage. And the science said, in 2018, the scientists said to us, not that we could eliminate the crisis, but that by moving to hold 1.5 degrees, we can avoid the worst consequences of the crisis. Read it carefully. The worst consequences, not the crisis completely. So how do we do that? Well, if we don't have money, we're not willing to invest, we don't do it. It's that simple. So the money part we've been working on with Rockefeller and Bezos Fund to figure out how can we de-risk the deals that are out there to provide energy, to deploy renewables, to do this transition, but how do we de-risk it and create bankable deals? Because the trillions that are in the background waiting to be invested by the largest financial institutions, and in fact all financial institutions in the world, would love to be able to invest. But there are hurdles, political hurdles, currency hurdles, various natural disaster hurdles and risks. We have to eliminate those. So what we did was sit there and say, okay, how are we going to get the cash to be able to grease the skids to make the bankable deal come together so we can get a PPA that's a 25, 30-year PPA, and you can actually go to the market and finance what you're trying to do. That's the key. And what I landed on, with the encouragement of a number of people, one of them, many of you know, is Anne Finucane, who wrote about this 2 or 3 years ago, talking about how there is a distinction between some of the exploited credits or offsets that have existed versus virtuous ones. And what we've done is sit down and put together a set of guiding principles, which we're releasing today, and we're pulling together a group of people, some of which are announced today, but it's not a complete list. There are more people that are going to be added to that to have a broad cross-section of input so that we are putting together, according to our principles, a mechanism that can attract some cash that will be used for limited purposes. And I will come to that in a moment. But what this is trying to do is make sure that we do this in the near term. We do it in an inclusive way, which is high, that we're delivering on the broader sustainable development goals, that we're including people who are affected, sometimes left behind in this process, that we're protecting their interests, that it's comprehensive, that we are supporting ambitious power sector-wide transition, that it is high integrity. Some offsets and some credits were not high integrity, and they've given a bad name to the idea that there might be a way in which you can attract some capital and still reduce emissions and avoid the worst of some avaricious practices out there. And we also want this to be supplemental. This is not in place of any obligation to put public money or fulfill the commitments that we have asked for. And it is to be transitional, meaning it's not forever. It's not a 15, 20-year bonanza that somebody's going to say, oh, I can buy a credit and then I don't have to do X, Y, and Z. No, sorry, that's not the way it is. Everybody's going to be responsible for living up to net zero and meeting the measurements. But we believe you can have high integrity, accountable, transparent credit, which will help us to be able to put some money on the table. And the money is used in the following way. When we put together the deal with Indonesia, which we negotiated for a year and a half or so, we had to figure out, how do we close some coal plants? How do we now accelerate the transition to the renewables that we want deployed? And how do we do this in a way that's transparent and virtuous and so forth? Well, we found that way. And we made an agreement with X amount of renewables that are going to be deployed, with a pace of closing of coal and transitioning, and not just closing excess capacity, but really getting at the problem of emissions. And that's our goal here, folks. And I'm convinced for the following reason. It is accountable to the naked eye. There are only two purposes for which we will allow someone to be able to buy a credit. One, to be closing down or transitioning existing fossil fuel facility that is providing power. And two, for the actual deployment of renewables that will replace current dirty sourcing. That's it. So you can see it built. You can see it coming online. You can measure what is happening here. And if you do this correctly, which we are determined to do, we can get a certain amount of cash now, because some companies have tried hard, not enough yet, to begin to implement their programs for net zero by 2050, correct? And so you may have a company, a large tech company or somebody, that have gotten to 80% of their scope 1 reductions. But then they get stuck. Why are they stuck? Not their fault. They're stuck because there aren't enough electric vehicles to be able to buy to get your fleet to be electric, so you're reducing emissions and living up to your goal. Or because there isn't a grid. You don't have a smart grid. And you can't tap into the smart grid. Therefore, you don't have a physical way of using your power in a way that meets the standards. So we have to be smart. We can't sit there and say, well, tough, we're going to hold you accountable anyway. Nobody is living by a law to reduce, to hit 2050 net zero. There's no law. People are doing it because they're exercising a sense of public responsibility. And if we turn around and say to them, we're not going to listen to your problem, or we're not going to try to address your problem, or we're not going to give you an opportunity to be able to get where you're trying to go, they're going to say, well, the hell with you. Why the hell do I try to do this? It's easier for me to avoid the crisis of an NGO criticizing me because they say what I'm doing is violative of green principles. When I'm trying to be a good citizen, I might as well opt out. And I don't get my board of directors all wound up in what's going on. So, long story short here, folks, sorry about this, but we need to find a virtuous way of getting money into the system so that we can transition faster. That is exactly what this is for. And if we can get, and here's why. In Egypt, we cut a deal with the Egyptians called it's the Nuefe program, where they are going to shut down 5 gigawatts of gas-provided power, transition that gas to Europe to help them in the context of Ukraine and the problem they have. But they're going to shut down 11 gas turbines that are polluting and deploy 10 gigawatts of renewables. Wow, 15 net transition of power and emissions. And the way we made it happen was we put up money. We did find some concessionary funding. Very hard. It was very hard. But we got about $500 million total in the end. We put $35 million in cash, some lending. The EBRD put in some money from a trust fund. We got money from Germany. Germany really stepped up, thank you, Germany, and put major funding on the line in terms of a very concessional loan. And so in the end, that money facilitated the de-risking and allowed us to be able to get the deal, which is a $10 billion expenditure to be able to deploy new energy. Now, we can't take a year and a half to do this one by one by one. So what we want is to create a means by which we're attracting capital to the table, which will be concessionary. They're buying the credit. They get a certain period of time where that credit is going to help them meet their goal, but it helps us meet our goal. It actually results in a reduction of emissions. And I don't see how anybody can be critical of real reductions in emissions, because that is our challenge right now. That's how we win this battle. So, as I say, it's temporary. We don't know yet. This consultative group, which is going to be coming together, and some were announced today, more will be announced in the next days, but it's going to be broad-based, jurisdictional, and help us to be able to put this together in a way that has true environmental integrity, but works. So SBTI, VCMI, these different players will be at the table, but so will business. So will other people who need to make it work. So thank you. I know I went on a little long, but...
Mr. Secretary, I'm just so glad this audience got to hear that. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, you just heard one of the most powerful advocates and executors for creating a better world. So thank you so much for that opening statement and laying out this really, really exciting plan. Let me, and you know, $4 trillion need next 30 years, question of how to de-risk, how to create bankable deals. You laid out some of the guiding principles. We're going to be looking forward to seeing the rest and the people who are engaged. Let me turn to Liz. As all things, these things become acronyms, so it's already become ETA, so the Energy Transition Accelerator. How can it be designed to promote a just transition from fossil fuels to clean energy? And so that's ultimately the goal. And then so that fossil fuel workers and vulnerable communities are protected. Also, just listening to Secretary Kerry, you know, Sharm el-Sheikh wasn't that long ago. And it seems like you've made quite a bit of progress. Can you talk about the progress you've made since then and the progress you want to make, like going up to COP28 as well?
Liz, why don't you talk about it a bit, and then I'll add.
Okay, sounds good. I'll talk about the humanity bit, and we can
Fabulous.
riff on the, okay, perfect. Sounds good. So I think, you know what, and thank you for those inspiring and good, excellent framing comments. I mean, I think from a foundation perspective, we draw a lot of inspiration and leadership from your vision and are very, very supportive of it, because, you know, I mentioned this yesterday in my remarks. I think for the foundation, one of the things that we care so much about is making sure that we put humanity at the center of all of our efforts. That is the core business that we are in. And this, to me, when we were looking at this opportunity with you, enabled us to do that, because it enabled us to solve the challenge that we saw around project development, a critical need on decommissioning and reducing emissions, as well as putting people at the center of what we need to do. And as we work on this together, I think we really want to make sure that the ETA does three things. I just wanted to share that. So first, the first order of work is really around how we actually do these country-driven energy transition strategies, and making sure that we do it in a very high-integrity, jurisdictional way. And I mentioned those critical words because I think that is also a key differentiator in what other frameworks have been out there. And so for us, what we're trying to do is just make sure that we design a really good high-integrity process and make sure that we actually put the guardrails in place to make sure that workers, in particular, are front and center in the design of it. And we can do a lot by looking at existing projects and programs that have done this. You know, one of the things that I know we've been working on with the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, which includes Andrew and the IKEA Foundation, and Joseph is here as well today, is working on the Komati power plant in South Africa. And one of the things that GIAP and the foundations and we have done is work with them, the local electric utility, the local university there, to provide training and upskilling of existing workers that are at that plant, but also communities, so that we're building capacity around new green jobs for those communities. And that is a critical part. I think Her Excellency and Damlola and several people on the prior panel mentioned that. And that is a key part of the energy transition and will be a key part of the ETA. I'd say second is just making sure that we allocate a certain percentage of the carbon credit towards adaptation purposes. Not enough money goes to adaptation. That is a critical area that we know needs to happen, and we've seen that as an effective mechanism in other similar programs. And then the last, and to your point, Secretary Kerry, is that we have a process that's transparent and most importantly, inclusive. And so that is why I think, and if you'd like to speak about it more, perhaps we can talk about the high-level group that we've pulled together to make sure that we're getting a cross-section of people from around the planet, the best minds, private sector, government, public sector, to help us develop and design this in a way that has the integrity that we are seeking to be able to deliver.
So let me come back to you in a minute, Secretary Kerry, on that question of how much has been achieved and what should be achieved. We go to Andrew first for the point of view from the Earth Fund, Bezos Earth Fund. Why, this is an interesting three groups to come together. So why did you decide to join this initiative? Why do you see it as vital? And how do you actually make sure that the ETA delivers the high quality emission reductions and that they contribute rather than distract companies from genuine climate action, if that's a danger at all?
Well, look, first, Fred, thank you so much for this, this event. I think the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Forum each year has become a really central, driving, agenda-setting place to come. So thank you very much. Why did we join? Well, when Secretary Kerry gives you a call and says, for heaven's sake, let's get on with it. You don't say, well, let me think about it. You say, absolutely, we are going to jump right in. We've all seen the number, and thank you for your inspiring words, Secretary Kerry. I can be brief because I think you've said it so much better than we would. We've all seen the numbers. 4.2 trillion per year has to be spent on the future of energy, so to speak. That's a tripling of what we need. We're incredibly excited when we see coal-powered electricity generating plants closing, aren't we? Because that's going to be necessary. We need to see 925 closing every single year. So when you hear, oh, here's one, yeah, now you've got another 924 to do each year between now and 2030. Now, some people would say, well, why do you need carbon credits? I mean, isn't it attractive already to invest in renewable energy? Well, yes, it is. Plain fact of the matter is, it's not happening at anywhere near the pace that's required. And if you're a country that's really willing to show leadership, as South Africa has, Indonesia has, Vietnam is, various other ones, you actually need some help. And Secretary Kerry and other political leaders have played an amazing role with the leaders of these countries, actually taking bold measures. Now we need to, if you like, empower those bold measures. And so you do need carbon markets. Now, why is carbon credit markets not working at the moment for energy? Because there's something puzzling going on. Because there's been far more work done on the nature side of carbon markets with regard to developing emerging countries than energy. And actually, energy is more intuitive, isn't it? Because actually doing forest protection and restoration is actually more complicated, but far more work has been done on that. Far more money is flowing on that than to energy. So we've got to address that, and that's what this is all about. Why are private companies not investing at the moment? It's because it's too complicated. And they say, look, there's so many pitfalls. Quite frankly, we put some money in, someone's going to grumble. There's leakage or it's low quality. What's the point? We'll be accused of greenwashing. And what we're trying to do is say, actually, there is a sensible path forward. There is that sweet spot between, on the one hand, making sure you get the standards right. On the other hand, making sure you get the volumes of money right. And so what we're trying to do is, I think, terribly exciting. This is not just us working on our own. This is bringing in the entire global architecture, if you like. At the moment, as you know, greenhouse gas protocol, that's how you measure greenhouse gases. Then there is CDP, that's where you register what your greenhouse gases are. Then there's SBTI, Science-Based Targets Initiative. That's how you set your targets. Then there are various standard setting. You mentioned it yourself, Secretary Kerry. VCMI, that's looking at the demand side. So that basically says, if you're a private company and you want to get credit, you've got to be already on a good downward path. You've got to be signed up to science-based targets. Then there's something called ICVCM. I hope you're keeping up with all of this. That's on the supply side. And that basically says, look, if you're going to invest in an investment that's going to actually have some credibility, it better be high quality. And Liz mentioned the issue of what's called the jurisdictional approach, which is very big on the nature side. That means you can't just do a little project here because someone might cut down the forest there. You've got to look at the whole jurisdiction. Same thing applies on energy. No point decommissioning one coal plant and investing in renewable energy if someone else builds another coal plant over here. So governments need to be part of it. We need a jurisdictional approach. So what we're going to do, every single one of those alphabet soups I just mentioned, every single one of them is on the advisory council, the consultative group, together with many more. The sort of Brian Moynihan's head of Bank of America, Catherine McKenna, who wrote the report, for the Secretary General. Many leaders from the developing world are on that. At 9:15 this morning, our time, a press release came out with some of those names already. Do look at it. It's great to see Fred Krupp in the audience here because he's the president of EDF, the Environmental Defense Fund. They, together with the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, will be providing, if you like, the intellectual driving force and managing this. So this is an incredibly exciting venture. We would urge you to sort of join with us, particularly if you're on the investment side, particularly if you're a company that's thinking, my goodness me, I would really like to get engaged in this. We'd love to talk to you. So we're going to be very tough on the, if you like, the standard side. We've got best NGOs in the world, best developing country leaders that are demanding all of the kind of safeguards that Liz talked about. But at the same time, we need ambitious providers of funding that are not going to be providing the funding through this as an alternative to doing what they need to do in their own scope 1, 2, and 3. But as a complement to that. Because even if you're on that wonderful trajectory coming down to net zero in your own company, you're still emitting in the meantime some carbon, and this can actually help compensate for that.
Thank you for that, Andrew. And Mr. Secretary, what's very exciting about this, obviously, is what you've underscored, which is the measurable results side of it. So let me go back to the question that I posed to Liz about, it's been a short time since Sharm, what have you achieved? It's not that long of a time before COP28. What do you want to achieve by then? And I guess there's a third question within that, which is, this is a really promising strategy to scale up climate finance, but 4.2 trillion, how much of it do you want to do there? So in other words, how does this fit into other promising strategies?
Well, it's an integral part of it, Fred. Yeah. And let me describe part of the challenge here, folks, because it's not simple. We've been wrestling with development, for as long as all of us have been alive. And there are special challenges in development. When you go to an African country where only 17% of the nation has power, you don't have a particularly large pool of paying customers to be able to support a long-term PPA at market rates. It just doesn't work because you don't have enough people. In some places, they don't even collect revenue for the electricity that's being used. And so you have to build structure in certain places. Now, that's not our central problem. That's a moral and political challenge, in the sense that you can't be asking these countries to defer their future completely. They want to be able to develop. They have a right to be able to develop. We need them to develop. It's important to stability on the planet, relationships, and so forth. But we're going to have to be able to provide a concessionary structure for a period of time so that you can then get enough of a revenue stream that you're able to support something in the marketplace. That's one grouping. Fortunately, that is not the grouping that is most important to the solving of the climate crisis. Why? Because they are an infinitesimal amount of the problem currently. What we want to do is avoid them becoming more of a part of the problem, because if you add up all the developing world and it goes crazy on gas, for instance, in the next 10 years, we're in trouble. We're just negating everything else we're doing out there. So the way we're looking at it is, and I've said this many times, many of you may get tired of me saying it, but to me, it's the fundamental organizational principle. It's the reality around which we have to organize ourselves, as I said earlier. That is 20 countries, 20 economies equal 80% of all the emissions. If those 20 countries will get their act together, we win the battle. We can win the battle. And that's why we focused on Indonesia, because it's one of those 20. That's why we're focusing on Brazil, one of the 20. That's why we focus. Vietnam's not yet one of the 20, but it's in the next 10. So we're focused on Vietnam because there's too much coal, and we've got to begin to transition them. And in each of those cases, and we focused on Mexico, which is in those 20. And President AMLO, thanks to, I think, the good meetings we had over the last year and a half, has really changed and come around and said, we're going to deploy renewables. It wasn't even wasn't in their lexicon a year and a half ago. And now they're talking about 30 gigawatts of renewables deployed, increased hydro, and for the first time, really beginning to try to exploit their geothermal, which, by the way, they have active volcanoes. This is a place that has extraordinary capacity in geothermal. So there's money on the, being left off the table here, left on the table that people could make if you would begin to get all of that moving in the right direction. So that's what we're trying to do now, is get the larger economies in a place where they are actually reducing emissions. And as I said earlier, folks, this is not a forever program. This is not a sort of you can buy your way out for the long term. This is sort of a delay, 10 years, wherever we land. This is the kind of decision that this consultative group has to help us make. Is it till 2030 or is it till 2035 or something? But you're still going to have to be responsible to meet net zero by 2050, and that's going to require every company to still do scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, et cetera. So what we're trying to do is get as far as we can, Fred, in the next few months, so that hopefully we could have a few pilot efforts that are actually out there working. We've arrived at pricing and at the mechanism and so forth. And we could come to the UAE at COP28 and have an implementable program that goes forward. Now, this is not the only thing we're doing. Of prime priority, high priority for President Biden is MDB reform, Multilateral Development Bank reform. We must find the way to be interpreting the charters correctly so that we could have a significant amount of additional money that is available for concessionary lending, which would make an enormous difference. And both of you, your foundations, the Rockefeller and the Bezos, are invested and interested in helping to get that kind of reform. And then whatever else we can find as a way of getting into the trillions that need to be deployed. But those 20 countries do have the ability to provide revenue for these transactions. And they can get market-based deals going. I mean, we're looking at PPAs that can be struck with Indonesia that will help in this transition. I think that the market is really critical to this, which is why we're looking at a market-based component of how you're going to solve this problem. The trillions of dollars that were assembled, Mark Carney did a lot of really hard work assembling the GFANs and so forth. But that money is investment money. It's not giveaway money. And investment money means you're going to have to be able to get a return on that investment because you're accountable to clients. You have fiduciary responsibilities. And you can't just ignore them. So we have to harness the combined efforts of the regulatory structures, which look at disclosure, for instance. I mean, it's very hard for me to understand how anybody could be fulfilling their fiduciary responsibility by ignoring climate crisis and allowing your supply chain and your entire business to be disrupted by damage and by future interventions of Mother Nature. That doesn't fit, in my judgment. So I think we're due for a real reckoning here with how the marketplace is looking at these challenges and this reality. We can't solve the climate crisis without, and I want to, don't ever edit me at that word, we can't solve the climate crisis. without being able to marshal these sums of money. And we can marshal them. This is the largest market the world has ever known, folks, the clean energy market, the transitional market. The building out of smart grids, new transmission lines, putting in place the infrastructure to support electric vehicles, building out the hydrogen network all of this is money-making. It's how we built our nations. It's how we have employed millions of people. We're just transitioning again as we transitioned, frankly, in the original Industrial Revolution. And we have to be excited about this because it is millions of jobs. Fastest growing job in the United States of America 2 years ago, 3 years ago, for several years was wind turbine technician. Second fastest growing job was unfortunately nurse practitioner because of COVID. Third fastest growing job was solar panel installer. There are extraordinary opportunities here if we will get our act together. And many, many, many companies have now come to that conclusion and recognize that, you can marry the future here. You can do this in a way that provides a planet that is cleaner, healthier, and safer.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. So Liz, I'll get a signal from somebody whether we're wrapping up, we have some time, but I think I'd like to be able to ask you a quick question and Andrew a quick question, then close out. But I want to go back to what Secretary Kerry talked about at the very beginning about how to de-risk it and how to create bankable deals. That's the world you come from, Liz. You can share with the audience a little bit what your profession, what your job was before taking on what you're doing now, because it fits perfectly with this. So how do you design an ETA to ensure de-risking capital flows upfront for the most urgent fossil fuel transition projects in emerging markets from the banker's perspective?
Thanks, Fred. And just to come clean on that, I think in my old life, before I got a chance to work in philanthropy, I spent about 20 years as a public power infrastructure banker at a firm called Lehman Brothers, which some of you may have known. But I think I think that's what's really interesting to me in this regard, because there is a lot that needs to be done in terms of developing the financial structure, and that is why, as Andrew said, we need people like Anne, like Brian, all of the bright financial minds. We've got Chris Leeds on our team as well, helping us think about how do we actually marry the forces of banking and markets together, since that will be such a critical element of the design. And I think I just say a couple things. One is I want to acknowledge that there are a number of other existing structures that people are working on in the market today. So Asian Development Bank has its energy transition mechanism. The Climate Investment Fund has its own fund. So I think we want to learn from what other people have already done and have started doing so that we can build on top of that. I think we also need to take a look at some of the interesting ways that we can securitize and use that market to be able to look at the forward opportunities there, to basically think about how then we can take those revenues that might come later, or those opportunities and financial gains that come later, and put them forward, because as the Secretary said, we need the resources upfront to developing countries today to be able to both decommission and create the infrastructure asset on the other side that allows them to continue building and growing their economies. So we've got a lot of financial structuring work to do. That is why it's a critical work stream of the ETA and the path that we are going to take going forward. And so stay tuned, but I think, as Andrew said, this is a whole of planet effort. We need your engagement, and we would encourage and welcome it as part of the work going forward. So thanks.
Terrific. Please.
Can I mention one thing, just very quickly? The IRA is going to make an enormous difference in this challenge. And I know some people are reacting, oh my gosh, there's some provisions in the IRA that are kind of protectionist and maybe get in the way. And I think we'll be able to resolve and work through those. I really do. But the bottom line is, by putting literally hundreds of billions of dollars on the table for further R&D and development and deployment of initial startup initiatives, we're going to help develop supply chains where they don't exist. And we're going to help accelerate. I mean, that's an enormous amount of concessionary funding that is going into right now in the Department of Energy. We have billions of dollars that are going into companies, into projects. It's going to help close the gap here in terms of what is fundable and financially, can work. And I think it's going to change things. We're going to have, it'll help with the deployment of green or blue or, turquoise, hydrogen and so forth. I think that exciting things are going to be happening. And rather than having some other entities complain and say, well, you guys have now changed the market and you're going to shift things, everybody should join and do the same thing. That's how we accelerate to the $4 trillion, folks. We shouldn't be sitting there saying, oh my God, let's go backwards. Everybody should join up and do the same thing. Put your money into this development. Put your money on the line in terms of R&D. And that's how we're going to win this battle. I'm convinced.
Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And the Inflation Reduction Act, I got a good briefing just yesterday on what it does alone for hydrogen. And so that's it's pretty exciting. So finally, Andrew, I think we'll wrap up with this question. When this platform was launched, you stated there were very naughty, meaning K-N-O-T-T questions that the group would have to grapple with. What are the naughtiest, and how are you how are you grappling with them?
Well, first, who wants to solve easy problems? These are difficult problems, and that's why we're sort of stuck. We're sort of constipated at the moment. Yeah. I mean, there's plenty of money out there, but it's not going to the right place. Plenty of money in the world, and it's not going to the right place. So what are they? They're on the both supply and the demand side, standards that are honorable, including human standards, environmental, ecological standards, and so on. On the demand side, that's, a company has to honor its own scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. So those are difficult problems. But there are other difficult problems, which we're going to be grappling with, which is going to be really exciting. How do you set the price? Mm-hmm. Where does the money go? And this is your point to Liz about de-risking, which also Secretary Kerry mentioned. The great thing about voluntary carbon markets is they work for you twice. You put $100 million into this, that buys renewable energy in and of itself. But in addition to that, it changes the entire calculus for a deal, as Secretary Kerry says. That $100 million can unlock 200, could several billion dollars if you do it right. But you have to then actually make sure the money is injected in the right way. So those are some of the knotty problems, but they're exciting. And as someone I had the privilege of running one of the best environmental think tanks in the world, the World Resource Institute, and we're leaders in standards. Environmental NGOs have done us a huge favor setting high standards. But sometimes in this very, very high stress, high pressure, need for action today world, sometimes almost too thoughtful, and sometimes we slow things down too much. So what we're trying to do is unlock that, get the standards that are just as high, but actually then unleash, a flow of funds that can make a huge difference.
So as a result of Andrew's alliterative description, we now understand that the ETA is the Coles or Senecot of the movement, right?
Well, that does seem to be a really good place to end.
To end, yeah.
Mr. Secretary, Liz, Andrew, what a wonderful conversation. This could go on a lot longer. I'm sure people in the audience who would like to contribute to this in one way or another will catch you and provide you ideas, and we can help connect you all as well with the ETA and with this group. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you for what you're doing.
10 seconds.
Please.
Everybody here, your organizations, your countries, whoever can speak out. Alexei Navalny's family has made it clear he is very ill and being held in prison without medical care that he needs. So anybody who could speak out and make it clear that the world believes that even prisoners should be given the medical care that they need, and hopefully we can make a difference.
Thank you for that. Thank you for being here. At some point, some voice is going to tell you what we're doing next, but thank you so much for all your attention.
Okay. Thank you so much, Fred. I'm probably that voice that says a huge thanks to all of you. And a fascinating discussion. Please don't leave the room. We're going to get very lonely and get very upset if I lose half the audience. So thank you so much, Fred, and the great panel, of course. John Kerry, we all need him on our side. Go. Thank you so much. Great words of inspiration there in terms of what needs to be done. A sort of dose of realism looking at what's happening in the world and the fact that we can actually, this was a human-induced problem, and the solutions are very much out there, and I think it's all in our power to actually change things and make a difference. Please, I would ask you to stay with us. We have a huge rundown for you today. We have some great people talking about it. We're going to be moving on in a way, continuing the conversation that we've already had this morning, talking about emerging markets, looking at net zero pathways in the developing world in terms of what we can do about them and how we can make a difference. Now, we have about 45 minutes in this. As in all of the sessions, I really would like you to get involved and to ask some questions, but I'd like you to do it maybe a little bit earlier, the way we have time to get a few voices around. I know we have Shama. Where are you, Shama? You have a microphone. Shama is somewhere around with a microphone. She's going to be busy working on this side, I hope, and we'll have another colleague here. So I hopefully won't be looking for microphones later on. They'll be ready to go. So that's what I've asked our dear people to make sure that we're ready for. So as I say, we have a great panel here. Let me get them up on board here and let me get them started and get this conversation. So please, we'll look at this as, I suppose, a continuation of what we've already seen this morning and what we've already talked about. And I think we'll add some great value to you in this. So let me welcome from the U.S. Department of Energy, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Energy for Market Development, Climate and Multilateral Engagement. Isabella Munilla is in the house. Come on, big welcome for her here. Great, Isabella, thank you so much. From GE Gas Power, we have the Chief Technology Officer for Europe and the MENA region, Otman Benamar. Otman, thank you so much for coming to us. Mary Burse-Warlick joins us. She's the Deputy Executive Director of the International Energy Agency. Lovely to see you. Thank you so much. And Daniel Schroth, he's the Director, Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Department of the African Development Bank. Daniel, lovely to see you. Thank you so much. So you can see here we have a diverse panel that can give us some answers and you know, maybe a few solutions, but certainly some food for thought, because I think we've heard a lot about the issues in the emerging markets and the developing world that we really need to pay attention to, we need to look. Isabel, when we look, I suppose, at the priorities, the programs, the initiatives that go on in the U.S. Department of Energy, talk to us a little bit about, you know, how these priorities, I suppose, you know, help developing and emerging markets in terms of developing net zero pathways.
Great, thank you, Etna, and thank you to the Atlantic Council and all of you. What an incredible panel before this, incredibly inspirational. I think we've got a roadmap moving forward and seeing a lot of heads nodding about that.
Show me the money, as he said.
Exactly.
Show me the money.
So for the Department of Energy, we're the U.S. Science Agency on Clean Energy. I wanted to highlight a couple of initiatives that we're working on. And again, as Secretary Kerry said, we really want to take advantage of these extraordinary opportunities, and that's our mission. So we have an initiative called Net Zero World. I encourage you to look it up. It's our premier international program and the top international priority of our Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm. And so our role as a science agency is to scale new technologies that can increase the efficiency of mature technologies and then take those new technologies to scale in the marketplace. So our goal with Net Zero World is to assemble a broad range of resources from the US government across 9 federal agencies and 10 national labs. And we use these to support partner nations in building their foundations for a clean energy future. So it's a partnership. Our partner nations right now are Argentina, Chile, Egypt, Indonesia, Nigeria, Singapore, Thailand, and Ukraine. And through this partnership, we're working alongside these partner nations to develop actionable and tailored decarbonization strategies for the key sectors that they select.
Right.
So our national labs, they put their gold standard technical capacities to work in these partnerships, and they work to identify technological investment pathways to decarbonization. So these are practical partnerships focused on real outcomes. And so I wanted to provide a few examples from our countries.
Yes.
Yeah. And just to say, you know, we've been having a conversation around attracting finance to commercial technologies, correct, or waiting to become commercial technologies. So we bring together, as part of this initiative, U.S. agencies and development banks. So we've got the U.S. Treasury Department, the U.S. Exim Bank, we've got the International Development Finance Corporation, and many others. And the idea is to attract private sector to these initiatives that we're helping to support to really let's get these projects off the ground.
And I think we've been hearing that too, the importance of bringing the private sector, making it attractive for them.
Absolutely.
Because they want a return on investment.
Absolutely.
Without a doubt.
So
Please
just a
carry
few
on.
examples. So with Indonesia, we're analyzing investment strategies, as the Secretary mentioned, to deploy renewable energy while speeding coal plant retirement. With Egypt, we're supporting efforts to add 10 gigawatts of renewables and develop green hydrogen and ammonia. And with Nigeria, we're analyzing the potential for carbon management, methane abatement, and distributed clean energy systems. And in Chile, we're sharing knowledge and best practices on managing the just transition for fossil fuel workers, sharing lessons learned for coal transitions, since that's very important. One other initiative, just very quickly, I just want to flag, is with the Clean Energy Ministerial, and we've got a big moment in July with our chair of Clean Energy Ministerial with India this year. We have what's called the Clean Energy Solutions Center. So we co-lead this initiative with Australia, and what it does is it mobilizes experts to help answer real-world, on-the-ground questions on the path to net zero. So we have an Ask an Expert service where governments that need authoritative technical advice can submit their questions and get service rapidly, free of charge. So just a couple of examples, or just one example actually. The government of Chad asked for advice on options to reach people living in very remote areas with clean and low carbon electricity. They wanted to find out how they could, what options were on the table. So we connected them with experts and provided analysis of solar, wind, biogas, and biomass technology options and costs, and provide a report with examples from countries around the world, scenarios and options. And then we focused on strategies that were applicable in remote areas, which is the solution that they were looking for. So it also included different business models for them to consider, and really focused on what their needs were. And this is one of hundreds of examples that I wanted to highlight, and the service has helped already about 90 countries on topics such as the design of feed-in tariffs, clean energy funding plans, regulations, standards, and incentive programs. And I just wanted to highlight just a couple of those examples because there's just real-world help that we want to provide our allies and partners.
No, and I think that's hugely important because, you know, we don't have to reinvent the wheel in every country, I think, and this is something that everybody also needs to realize, that it is also about knowledge sharing, I think, from projects that have already worked, and any help that anybody can give, I think, along the way, and particularly without a cost to it, I think. I like that, and I'm sure that's what a lot of other people like. Othman, when we look at the energy trilemma that we're looking at, indeed, around the world, and it's impacting, everybody's got to look at that. But a lot, you know, of the challenges, I suppose, and the issues, they're different in terms of emerging markets and developing markets. What do we really need to be looking at, you know, to identify those differences and then to be able to actually help and solve them?
Thank you, Edna. Power sector is one of the biggest contributor to carbon emissions in the world, so definitely.
But we need it so desperately.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
So it's essential as well. So we have to figure this one out.
Definitely we need to. It's one of the biggest area where we need to focus to solve for the climate change. However, and especially when it comes to emergent market, it's not a simple task just to look after sustainability only. These countries, some of them sees one of the biggest growth in terms of electricity demand, and some of them has already imbalance between demand and the supply, and a lot of them as well have not the right quality of grid to support the introduction of renewable. So when we look at decarbonizing the sector, we need to be careful about the three things, the trilemma that you mentioned. We need to make sure that we can guarantee reliable power. That's important, and we see that a lot of countries in the emerging countries suffer already power shortages. So we need to make sure that we bring that up and make sure that introduction of renewable will not add to the problem.
Yes.
And especially when you have countries where imbalanced between demand and supply, when you add renewable, you need to think about backup because you already don't have enough capacity. So it will add to the cost, which hits the second point of the trilemma, which is the affordability. We need to make sure that power remain affordable, and that even outside of emergent market, if we look what's happening today in Europe, I'm from France, so when we see that people are struggling with the baguette, the price of the baguette, because the price of the power hike.
Yes. Yeah.
So imagine that issue is even bigger in the emerging markets because the people cannot afford to pay the same prices as Europe. So we need to make sure that when we decarbonize, we don't add cost. We try to keep it within what people can pay for. And three is sustainability, definitely. So we need, when we add power capacity, because we need to support the growth of economy, which is more demanding with the electrification and so on, we need to make sure that we maintain or reduce the carbon intensity. You know, we will add power, but we would like to avoid adding carbon in the system. So these are the three main points that we have to care about when we are thinking about the energy transition, and especially for the emerging market.
No, absolutely. And I think that issue on cost too, you know, the more expensive power is, it's not just you're paying more for your power, you end up paying more for everything because there's a huge knock-on effect. The baguette, yes. The humble baguette.
Yes.
And people would even love to be having one in many areas, I think, in the developing world at the moment. So lots of issues around there. Mary, when we look at, you know, the work of the International Energy Agency, you're very busy looking at all areas, but you're specifically, you know, taking a focus on, you know, the universal access to energy that clearly it's of key importance. It's the priority on the route to net zero. But there's a lot of great, I suppose, solutions being offered. I mean, we've come up with a few, I think, in the last day and a half. We talk a lot around this. But on the ground, I mean, what's been executed and what's happening? Sometimes I think there's a little bit of a misfit, maybe a lot of talk and not enough action.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and to be a part of this discussion today. Thank you to the Atlantic Council as well. I know the subject of you know, universal access to electricity, to energy, has come up quite a bit, and really it couldn't be more important. And I think it's really important as we look at the global context we're living in today, in the context of Russia's invasion in Ukraine and the global energy crisis that we're continuing to live with, that the impacts have been felt really by consumers all around the world, not only in Europe, as you mentioned, but you know, with particular impacts on the developing world. And in that regard, we've seen for the first time in a while some backsliding in terms of additional people losing access to electricity, and also backsliding in terms of access to clean cooking. And on both counts, getting back on board, making progress, achieving progress again in both of these areas is really an important component to the broader global challenge of you know, decarbonization and achieving net zero emissions. And again, as I think has been referenced elsewhere in the context of this forum, there are many countries around the world, including many from the developing and emerging world, that have made net zero commitments, you know, recognizing too that, and I know we may get to this separately as well, that there are different starting points for these countries, for countries around the world, and that means the transition may take longer elsewhere. But of course, much deeper, much more significant, really high levels of investment, as was mentioned just now by Secretary Kerry and others, in clean energy and in renewables is going to be such an important part of the answer to achieving universal access. And in and of itself, of course, will help to also address the decarbonization and the emissions reduction challenge. So there's significant gains that can be achieved, and we've really got to focus on this issue of access to financing and investment, particularly in the emerging and developing world.
And I think that can, you know, we're going to hear a lot more on that issue, like right throughout the day. That, I think, has been very much, you know, landed as the key area. And then we work from there. Things get a little bit easier. Daniel, I mean, we've heard a lot, I think, even in the last day and a half, too, you know, about the need for a just energy transition, a fair and equitable energy transition. But also, I think we've heard an awful lot about the challenges. And if we continue doing what we're doing right now, it's not going to happen. So talk to us in terms of particularly the African context. You know, what can we do to make sure that actually there is a just transition?
Well, thank you very much, Edna, and thank you to the Atlantic Council for inviting me to this important forum. I think if we talk about just energy transition in an African context, we need to be cognizant of two key paradoxes, I would say. I mean, first of all, Africa has contributed, as we know, very little to CO2 emissions globally, historically responsible for about 4% of global CO2 emissions. Yet at the same time, Africa is already bearing the brunt of the effects of climate change. I think a 2021 study of Notre Dame University, in fact, highlighted that the 10 most vulnerable countries to climate change are in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's quite significant. We're seeing already the effects of droughts, flooding, cyclones all across the continent. And that's also in a context where global climate finance is only flowing very sparsely to Africa. It's only 3% of global climate finance flows that are going currently to Africa. And that's in a context, and Secretary Kerry mentioned it, of the 100 billion that still has not been met by the developed world. The second kind of paradox really is, and it's sort of building on what Mary said from the IEA, is that Africa indeed currently has the largest energy access deficit. We have some 600 million Africans without access to electricity, more than 900 million not having access to clean cooking solutions, with all the negative impact on health, women, deforestation, etc. And very importantly, we're backsliding, as you highlighted. We're not on track to meet SDG 7. And that's obviously contrasted at the same time with an abundance, particularly of renewable energy sources across the African continent. I mean, some of the best solar potential in the world, wind in some of the coastal areas, but also inland, geothermal, the East African Rift Valley, hydropower in Central Africa, etc. So there's a huge kind of a gap, obviously. And so if we look at energy transition in Africa, we need to really look context specific. So in South Africa, which is largely dependent still on coal-fired power generation, with a lot of people kind of being employed in that sector, yes, there is a conversation around energy transition in the classic sense. And that's also why, obviously, the Just Energy Transition Partnership, the agreement that was found at COP26 came to about. But if we look at the Central African Republic, if we look at Chad that was mentioned earlier, with energy access rates below 10%, with hardly any generation capacity, you cannot talk about transition. It's about building sort of ideally sustainable energy systems in the first instance. So from our perspective, it's really 5 key priorities that we see. First is a critical importance of planning, building on the best kind of knowledge, information and data that is available, and sort of tapping into resources such as NREL, from the labs that the DOE has at its disposal. The second one is really project preparation. We see still many kind of projects that lack all the necessary feasibility studies to allow then institutions such as ourselves to finance these type of projects. A third key priority is really around investments in transmission. I think you highlighted that one of the key challenges to many African countries with very weak, fragile grids is to be able to integrate larger shares, particularly of variable renewables from solar and wind. So there's a huge kind of deficit of investment in transmission, but also regional integration. And then, of course, there's the whole question of how to bring in more private sector investments, de-risking disinvestments. That's a key focus also of the African Development Bank. And last but not least, obviously, there's still a lot of work to be done on sort of the legal policy, regulatory frameworks that are not yet adequate in a number of countries. Also, I would say...
In a number of countries around the world. I mean, I don't think it's unusual in that area. Otman, let me bring you in to follow up just on, you know, what Daniel's talking about there. Because when we look at infrastructure, and I suppose challenges with transmission and distribution, this is a key area too that, you know, for what you're doing at GE Gas Power, you can actually help this situation here. But distribution, transmission, infrastructure, all of that, one size does not fit all in any country. So how do we resolve that issue? How can we make it better?
I think we need to start acting now. That's number one. And start acting what it is existing, improving what is existing, and that's the short term. And we do have solution there to improve the output, to improve efficiency, improve the flexibility to cope with intermittent sources of energy. And that's on the short term. So it helps really maintaining the assets to serve the introduction of renewable. And we can also improve the efficiency of a lot of countries which are still running with simple cycle power plants, what we call simple cycle power plants with very low efficiency, such as 33%. By just converting those assets to combined cycle, we can add 50% power without adding any fuel. And just as an example, in the GCC, we're talking about 50 gigawatt of simple cycle. So that's, you can add 25 gigawatt without adding any fuel. So you're reducing the carbon intensity, actually, by doing that. So these are some of the solutions that we have on the short term. We have also to care about the grid. Yeah, we mentioned it. I can add to it that because a lot of grids cannot handle the intermittency of the renewable. We need to make sure that there are enough substations. We add digital to make sure that we are dispatching the power the right way. So these are solutions for the short term. Now, these assets will not be stranded in the future when we are decarbonized. We have also solutions for the long term. And some of them were developed with the DOE. So I was talking with my colleague about the combustion in our latest technology, which we call 9HA, has been developed with the Department of Energy to be able to burn hydrogen. And we can already offer solution today, which can burn up to 50% blend of hydrogen, which is the best available currently. And we have the path to go up to 100%. We are working also on solution with carbon capture. We're partnering with technology suppliers. We're already selected in few projects, not in emerging countries necessarily, but in the UK or in the US, where we are working on optimizing the solution, integrating the whole carbon capture solution into the power plant to make sure that we continue supply reliable power, but with the least amount of CO2 emissions.
And again, I think the big focus has to be on decarbonizing. Of course, on the road to net zero, and as we go closer to you know, greener fuel and more renewable solutions, gas still has a huge role to play.
Yes, definitely. I mean, we cannot look. I can give the example of Morocco. I'm originally from Morocco. So Morocco has made great progress in renewable. They already today have more than 30% of the installed base, which is renewable. But we are currently in discussion with them on bringing clean fuel, which is natural gas, in some of their assets which are running today on heavy fuel. So that will improve and potentially converting those assets to combined cycle, as I mentioned it. But they are also thinking about adding new power plant with the latest and highest efficiency technology, because that will unlock their ability to reach their objective, which is 52% by 2030. So gas is key to make sure that we can go faster in renewable, but also, again, I insist on the grid. The grid quality is very important to continue introducing renewable.
Isabel, a lot of these projects, I mean, are going to need investment, and I think that was very clear in the last panel. It couldn't have been more clear, where it's like literally was, we need money and we need cash and we need it in the right places. But when we look at the investment in climate, I suppose, and clean energy projects, how will they financially benefit the emerging markets, I suppose, who are actually looking to get to net zero?
Yeah, thank you for that question. From the perspective of our department, I wanted to endorse one of our top priorities is good planning, right? The energy system planning, working to see how these projects fit into that plan, seeing what options are available, that's fundamental. And then second, our view is that innovation anywhere supports progress everywhere. And so that's a fundamental investment strategy for our department to de-risk at a large scale technologies that can be deployed across projects all over the world. And thank you for that mention of your work with DOE. And so for us, really fundamental to a net zero future is reducing those costs. So our domestic investments that we've made recently, billions in domestic energy markets, provide a runway for private investment. And we think this is going to have an impact not just in the US, but in the entire world. And this is part of the US effort to get us back on track to our Paris commitments, right? So just one example of that, of these types of investments, are what we call our Energy Earthshots initiative. Again, encourage you to take a look at those. So these set specific cost targets for linchpin technologies that are necessary to meet climate goals. So, and these are designed to tackle really tough technical challenges and specific cost hurdles related to specific technologies, working with our national labs. And so we have targets for hydrogen, long duration storage, carbon abatement, enhanced geothermal, floating offshore wind, and industrial decarbonization. And so just one example, our hydrogen Earthshot aims for $1 per 1 kilogram of clean hydrogen in 1 decade. And we think that this is going to revolutionize clean transportation and industry. And then, to the point on energy, the need for efficiency and reliability and flexibility, we believe that effective storage is obviously fundamental to the work that we're all doing. And so we have a long duration storage shot that aims to reduce the cost of grid scale energy storage by 90% for systems that deliver 10 or plus hours of duration in a decade. So those are just a few of the examples that we think are going to help other countries, especially in emerging markets. And in fact, we've done this about a decade ago. So President Obama had a Sunshot initiative that the aim was to drive down utility scale solar costs, and it did by $1 per watt to 6 cents per kilowatt hour. And so these effects were seen in the US, but then obviously around the world, we've seen solar costs become some of solar has become some of the cheapest and most affordable energy around the world. And this is just a couple of examples of how our agency, in terms of the role that we play, can bring down some of these costs.
And I mean, some great ambition there, but some of these practical solutions, I think, that can make a difference, and they need to be able to make a difference, some of them in the near term, some obviously medium and longer term. Mary, when we look at, and in fact, please be thinking if you have any questions here for my panel. I do believe, where's Shama? Shama's over here. She has a microphone, so catch her eye, and please, if you have any questions, we're more than happy to look at maybe a few specific areas. But Mary, when we look at mobilizing more energy investment, clearly there's been a huge cry, a call for action in terms of this has to be done. But it's often not easy, and of course the cost of capital is high, and some areas perceived riskier than others, so people shy away and they actually don't jump in there with maybe the eagerness they might in some other areas. How can, what are you working on, and what do you see in terms of how we can change that?
Great. Well, thanks for the question. I'm happy to add a little bit to the discussion in that regard. First, I think just focusing very specifically on the emerging and developing economies, we've seen very encouraging signs, obviously, for many countries in the developed world, from the US with the Inflation Reduction Act, in the EU with the Repower EU and the Fit for 55, in Japan with their green transformation and other initiatives, that in those parts of the world, significant amounts of capital financing from governments are now being dedicated to the clean energy transition, which is wonderful and so important. It's something we've not seen before and really think can be very transformational. But again, if we look at the developing world, we don't see those kinds of resources, and that part of the world has been especially hit by the whole range of crises. Not only the energy crisis, the food crisis, health issues, and so on, in a way that has particularly impacted them. And then you add to the cost of capital, which you referenced, and I think a number of other speakers have mentioned that the cost of capital in many parts of the developing world can be as much as 7 times higher than it is in the developed world for investments in even solar PV projects and things like that. And in terms of what the IEA has done, last year we did release something called the Cost of Capital Observatory, which is basically an inventory that takes a look at what the differentiated costs of capital are. And the next step is
a report that's available, what, on the website?
Yes, yes it is. Yes, it is. The next step, of course, is to analyze this more deeply and see what can be done about addressing this. And I know this was referenced in the last panel as well. There's a whole host of issues that need to be looked at. I'll also add that we had released at the IEA about 1.5 years ago a report on financing the clean energy transition in emerging and developing economies. And so it is a topic that we're really focused on. Just to add that there's a hugely important role on the part of governments and multilateral development banks to continue to provide concessional finance in terms of financing investment for clean energy projects. That in turn, again, as others have mentioned, can really provide an accelerator or send strong signals to the private capital markets, where we see by far the largest source of financing available. And so the work that's being done on what was just discussed with the Energy Transition Accelerator is so important in helping to unlock and provide solutions to some of these issues. But clearly a really important subject that will need to be continued. And with President Macron's summit coming up in June to look further at the financing issue, that I think will be a really, really important moment for us to continue to dig deeper in looking at real solutions.
And I know, this is a big feature in Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week. We take this conversation from the Atlantic Council on to the next couple of days as well, and some of the big banks are going to be in place as well. So I'll get the opportunity to maybe put a few of these questions to them as well. And clearly a segue perfectly to you, the role of the development banks, and particularly the African Development Bank. What are you doing on the ground, making a difference, and that you can see practical results coming from?
No, thank you for the question. And indeed, from our side, we've really been trying over the last couple of years to increase financing flows into clean energy in the African context. I think a good example to highlight in terms of that mobilization effort is our Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa, which has sort of grown to become one of the largest blended finance facilities for the just energy transition in the African context. We were able to raise over the last 2.5 years, over $300 million in grant contributions for CEFA. But CEFA is a blended finance facility, so we can provide grant where it's absolutely required and necessary, but also to provide concessional loans, take riskier positions in new innovative funds. Just an example, we invested $10 million from CEFA in the first kind of fund that's looking at access to clean cooking solutions, Spark Plus, already invested in 2 projects in Africa. I think these are sort of the type of investments that are critical to unlock more private sector engagement in the energy sector. So that's one example that I want to highlight. Another example more on sort of the larger kind of side of the institution, and I think the African Development Bank, we had sort of been facing some capital constraints over the last couple of years for various reasons. So we were in a way forced to be innovative, and we've been particularly innovative, I would say, on some of our balance sheet optimization transactions. So for example, we approved just in October last year a transaction with the UK government, a $2 billion guarantee for a room-to-run sovereign transaction, together also with the involvement of several private insurers, that basically transfers the risk from some of our sovereign portfolio to those institutions. And in that context, it's basically freeing up additional capital that we can invest in projects that are supporting particularly sustainable energy, but also climate more broadly.
Now, I don't want to put you on the spot, Daniel, but many people have been calling for, I suppose, a complete overhaul of the development banks. I was thinking there was something odd about my microphone. Okay, we're back in action here. God forbid you wouldn't hear me. Just when I'm asking him that question, not putting you on the spot, but we've been hearing, I mean, that there needs to be an overhaul on some of the development banks. I mean, sort of what, and good you're taking some initiatives, but kind of what's been broken along the way? I don't want you to go too much detail at the minute, we don't have time, but what are you doing to make sure that the African Development Bank, you know, is looking like a reliable, trustworthy, and actually is hopefully, you know, moving the focus in the right direction?
Well, I think first of all, we have sort of really set clearly out what are our objectives in terms of climate. It's one of the key priorities for the bank. We've adopted a policy, strategy, and also clear action plan with commitments over the next couple of years. We've in fact met in 2021 our climate finance targets with more than 40% of our investments going in climate finance. I think importantly, and we're the only multilateral development bank that has also placed a strong emphasis on adaptation finance, which is, as I highlighted earlier, particularly important for Africa. I think we had in 2021 67% of our climate finance being focused on adaptation. We're championing in that context the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program. We're also trying to see how our concessional window, which is the African Development Fund, which is sort of the equivalent of the World Bank IDA, becomes more responsive to the needs of African countries. We had just concluded early December the replenishment of the African Development Fund with record numbers thanks to the donors to the fund, but also now several African countries that are contributing with their own money into the African Development Fund. And one of the examples is we were able to create a climate action window, sort of a dedicated kind of envelope of resources to increase climate ambition, and of course energy is a key priority in that context. So those are some of the examples. There's obviously a lot more work to be done, but I would argue maybe because of this kind of constrained context that the bank has been operating in a couple of years, that we're certainly trying to be innovative, including in terms of making the case that some of the special drawing rights that the IMF has made available are channeled through the MDBs to use our ability to leverage those resources and be able to invest more in African countries.
And I mean, I guess even almost, you know, looking at your role too, the specialty role that actually has put this at top of the agenda, that's a new shift, I guess, as well.
Indeed, I mean, we adopted a very ambitious strategy, the New Deal on Energy for Africa in 2016, which really placed energy at the top, sort of our #1 priority for the African Development Bank, because energy has, as we all know, such a critical impact for development at large. And that also included a restructuring, and renewable energy indeed was one of the priorities that was also then reflected in the new organization.
Again, I think, you know, making sure access to energy is a huge enabler. Did you want to ask a question? Here we have, Shama's got the microphone, and now we've got a few questions. Now we're cooking, always at the last 10 minutes. I think there's something psychological about that.
Hello, I want to thank you all for your contribution and this discussion. I have two questions. The first question is directed to Mr. Daniel, regarding, because one of the main questions that came to my mind during the discussion about energy transition and how that can be applied for African continent, where there is huge gap in capital finance and all of that. So how you can tackle, like, do you, like one of your strategy at the African Development Bank, is it going from like to go through conventional way of supplying sustainable energy and then go for energy transition, or just start from the, like the last step, to provide energy solutions for poor countries like, as you mentioned, Central Africa and Chad and others. Like yesterday, only Heathrow Airport has energy demand more than Sierra Leone.
Yeah. Let me just answer that first question, and we'll come back to you in a minute. I'll get another question from the gentleman there, and we have time. So please, we need to speed up now because we have a few questions.
Sure, I'm going to be very brief, but I think the first important point is we need to look at each country individually. What is the particular context? So from our side, we're really trying to identify what are the best sort of solutions. And that does not mean that Africa should sort of follow the same path that the West has done. So it's not kind of building first a conventional kind of power base and then you transition. So for many of the countries that currently do not have or have very limited generation, I think sort of trying to see how can we from the start sort of use kind of the enormous renewable potential is there to build that up. Also looking at providing access through decentralized energy access solutions. I think a lot of possibilities through green mini-grids, through solar home systems in the very remote areas. I think that's sort of some of the areas that we're really focusing on. And of course it needs to be done in close collaboration with the countries and based on sound planning as we highlighted earlier.
Let me just bring Mary in on that one there. We look at the policies in the US, the clean policies and the climate goals. They work there, but could they work in emerging markets and could they do something similar? And I can see Othman wants to contribute to this as well. Go ahead.
No, great, thank you. I mean, I think what we're getting at here, and it's incredibly important, is that we need to share lessons. And I think for us as an agency, we use the platforms of the Clean Energy Ministerial, we use the Mission Innovation, we have, again, I mentioned it again, I'm pitching this, we have our big meetup in India in July, and that's absolutely critical. We also have our Net Zero World partnerships we talked about, we've got strategic clean energy partnerships, and this is a place where we are able to share the lessons that we're learning about the approaches we take to tax incentives, et cetera. But I wanted to draw our attention a little bit to, when we're thinking about whether energy access or energy transition, for us, workers are extremely important. So I want to highlight a couple of areas where we're sharing lessons with our partners.
We don't have a whole lot of time now, so I've got to
we
speed
do
you up
not,
a little
we
bit
do
on
not.
this.
But I did want to flag a couple of areas, and this is really essential when we're thinking about transition, which is there's worker protections and incentives that need to be put in place when we're thinking about transitioning out of coal, out of oil and gas, and those workers need to be reskilled to supply our workers for the next generation of technologies. And I wanted to flag a couple of policies that we're putting into place. They're new, but we want to share our experiences. We've got expanded energy tax credits for efficient commercial buildings, and it includes bonus credits for businesses that pay prevailing wages and hire registered apprentices. So we want to make sure that companies that promise to pay wages but don't follow through are penalized, and workers who owed prevailing wages will receive the difference plus interest. So, and this is a commitment. We need to bring our people along with this transition, and there's ways that policies that we can put into place. Now, we're testing this right now. So it's essential that we keep up the conversation and we continue to help each other to drive innovation, especially in bringing our people along with the transition. Another one I wanted to flag is that for us, we have clean energy tax credits that are increased by 10% if a clean energy project is established in a community that has previously relied on the extraction, processing, transport, or storage of coal, oil, or natural gas as a significant source of employment. So it's really focused on creating economic development in communities potentially impacted by a transition. So really focusing on making sure that the workers who have been involved in industries that have driven our economic prosperity are brought into the transition, and making sure that our economic and fiscal policies that we're using to drive these new renewable energies, bringing people along. I think from a political standpoint in our country, it's essential.
We got 5 minutes left. I'm going to take another quick question from you, directed to one person. Quick answer. We're going to you, sir, and then we're going to have to wrap it up. I'm really sorry.
Okay. My other question is regarding also the funding available from other, like Mr. Senator John Kerry and others, like Bezos Fund and Rockefeller Foundation. How Africa can take more out of that fund, because now it is only small portion. As he mentioned, $300 million on only 2.5 through credit from UK.
I don't think my people have an answer for that. You need to chase down our other colleagues on that.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm going to take a question from you.
Hi, good morning. In the previous session, Secretary Kerry was mentioning the top 10 polluters or carbon emitters. One of them first is China, followed by US and India. We heard a lot of views from US, but we didn't hear any views from India or China. Is it an aberration, or is it even at the highest level, and is not that a problem?
You know, I want to, as I say, we've only got a couple of minutes left. And I think we got to take good care. I want to give this one to Mary, perhaps. And also maybe add into that, I think many of the countries having different starting points in terms of how they're going to manage that. Maybe you can do 2 for 1 there.
Sure, happy to do that. And I will say that thank you for pointing that out. I think all of us here, and I certainly know that governments and international organizations, IRENA included, really all around the world, of course, are in discussions with China, India, and all the many countries where this issue of emissions is among the biggest problem. And the JETP, the Just Energy Transition Partnership that Secretary Kerry referred to, is one of those approaches through which there's significant and deep dialogue about how to take off some of the heavy carbon-emitting coal plants, but also to provide support necessary for investments, new investments in renewables and clean energy. And just segueing to the other point that you mentioned, Etna, I think as we look at this issue, it's this whole set of challenges. There's no doubt that the issue Isabel spoke to on the importance of people-centered transitions all around the world is going to be very important. How do we ensure that people around the world see the benefits of the clean energy transition, which, and this is another area we've done quite a bit of work, is actually going to create millions and millions of new jobs. But the challenge is, of course, multifaceted, but ensuring that those who lost also have benefits. And second point, recognizing that not all countries, though I think countries around the world really do recognize the climate challenge, and many have committed to net zero or carbon neutrality goals going forward, but not all countries have the same starting point, have the same level of resources, and for that reason, we'll need to pursue different pathways forward as they try to meet their goals. So one of the challenges for all of us is ensuring that they get the support they need, the financing they need, and in some cases that means continuing to recognize too that conventional energy sources, as was mentioned, will need to be a part of the solution for some of the development that's needed.
We've sadly come to that point in our discussion here where we've got to be wrapping it up. Mary, I'll stay with you at the moment. A quick call to action if there was one that you want to send a message out there.
As I indicated, I really think globally about the challenge here. Not all countries, since our focus is very specifically on the emerging and developing economies, have the same access to the financing and the resources needed. Let's really think hard in this year ahead, just as I know the AFD is and others, on how we can unlock not only the public sector, but the private sector financing to support this really important global transition.
Daniel, if there was a call to action for you, what do you think is most urgent right now?
Well, I think just to build on that, I think one is we need to speed up because there's a huge opportunity cost if we don't act now. So we're not moving forward fast enough. We definitely need to scale up, particularly the flow of finance towards emerging countries, particularly in Africa, including climate finance. I've highlighted the percentage earlier. And I think there's also need to really do more to synergize. There are a lot of efforts from different partners, including ourselves, happening. We're talking to each other, but we're not yet kind of speaking and singing all from the same song sheet. So the synergizing of efforts is also needed to achieve the maximum impact.
Othman, there were so many areas we did want to touch on. We didn't really have time, forgive me, but I mean, a closing call to action.
I will try to put them on the closing action. So as GE, we have solutions for solving the trilemma from wind to hydro to gas and to grid as well. And we are working on developing those solutions to make them fit for the different countries, different regions. We're still improving on hydrogen blends to get to the 100%. We're working on new generation of carbon capture. But where I see a real problem today, which was connected with the financing and answering the gentleman, I mean, we see problems today with some of these emerging markets getting financing because they get financing from institutions based on countries where there is restriction on financing fossil fuels. But fossil fuels in these countries are still decarbonization. So that's a real big problem. Even we see developers shying away from funding, being involved in these projects, developers from Japan or from Europe, because they are heavy on their portfolio on CO2, and they cannot come and play here. So financing is key, and also policy. We need to make sure that local policies are adequate to support the right path to net zero, but also multilateral policies, not only the country policies, but also, for example, the European policy or UN, whatever, that can be set, which may not be fit for these countries.
I mean, very dynamic time in the industry, very challenging in many ways, but all of these issues have to be addressed. May I give you a closing word, Isabel, here to just send us all off? I mean, again, a quick call to action. What can we do, maybe in the short term, that can make sure we're surviving in the longer term?
Well, I'll just repeat what I said before, and obviously you heard Secretary Kerry, who I can't speak for. I think he said it all, but I think we need to help each other. We need to share lessons. There's incredible innovation happening in emerging markets, and we need to draw from those lessons. I'll say it again, we need to focus on our people and our workers and share lessons of how we're going to bring them along, because that political power is essential for the hard steps we need to take next. We need to share lessons there.
Super, thank you all so much. Please, a round of applause for our dear panel here, Isabel, Othman, Mary, and Daniel. Thank you all so much. We can finish up here. You'll all be delighted now. We're giving you a coffee break. Just on the India-China, I believe we have a speaker from China later. I haven't checked our colleagues from India, but great focus and attention on what's going on in India, without a doubt. Coffee break now, please. 15 minutes. Be back. There's lots going on. When we come back, the simultaneous sessions will be happening back in this room. And just keep on your diary, on your agenda for today. 5 o'clock, we have the European Commissioner for Energy. So Kadri Simpson will be here this evening at 5 o'clock. So make sure that's on the diary. I know you have lots of meetings and you have lots to do and lots of other things to attend, but make sure you're back here. Simultaneous sessions back here in 15 minutes. So enjoy your coffee break, and thank you all for your great attention. Thanks so much.